The footage that you are seeing comes from the earlier days of Capcom's Resident Evil franchise. However, outside of promotional material, you were never supposed to see this. Or this. Or this. In fact, there was a point in time where a certain group of fans would have done absolutely anything to witness what you're seeing now, much less to actually physically play it. The road that was taken to get here was a bloody one. An online journey full of lies, backstabbing, jealousy, anger, and division. All for a scrapped game that was intended to be largely forgotten. This is the story of Resident Evil 1.5. In 1996, followed by the success of the first game, Capcom announced that they were working on a Resident Evil sequel with a release date of March of next year. This early version included a lot of stuff that didn't make it to the final game. As we'll find out later, specific details of specific builds will become heavily sought after bits of crucial information to the community. Crumbs that are worth 100 times their weight in gold. The list of differences is exhaustive and could be a video on its own, so I'll just quickly go over the biggest ones. Leon Kennedy was still involved here, but as an existing cop rather than one on their first day when the outbreak occurred. The other playable character was a motorcyclist named Elza Walker, who would later on be replaced by Claire Redfield. There were also other side characters that only stayed in this version, and a few of the now familiar ones had different roles as the story itself was different too. Additionally, there were also more enemies, such as the zombie ape and the man spiders. This all looked very exciting and promising. The world established by the first game was going to be expanded on greatly. Gamers everywhere were filled to the brim with anticipation. But then on February 17th, 1997, a decision was made at Capcom that would have earth-shaking effects on the franchise and its fans. Despite the game being more than halfway done, it was officially delayed. And unbeknownst to the public at the time, it was because they were scrapping the project and starting over. Even though this meant more time and resources, alongside the risk of cancellation, the game's producer, Shinji Mikami, thought this would be the best decision. He was the director for the first game and was now a more hands-off producer for this one for most of its development. Up to this point, he let director Hideki Kamiya lead the team. But Mikami didn't like how it was turning out, how disconnected from his world it seemed. The police station was too clean compared to the Spencer Mansion, and there wasn't much connection to that game in the first place. On top of that, the suspense, story, and characters weren't as strong. This was partially because the separate teams were doing their own things at separate paces, causing different parts to not work well together. Mikami would tell Famitsu magazine that, if I had to compare this to making stew, each ingredient was not bad. We had good vegetables and good meat. At that time, I thought it would be a good stew if I just threw everything into the pot and added a few spices. But after tasting it, I thought, what is this? I knew that even if I let it cook, it would not turn out to be a good stew by a certain time. Mikami's gamble paid off, as Resident Evil would become a massive success, and although he initially planned for this to be the last game in the series, it is still going strong and steady to this day. In fact, it is Capcom's highest selling franchise, with over 150 million copies sold, and is also the highest growing video game horror franchise of all time. Of course, that also brings with it a massive fan base, myself included. By the way, I stream on Twitch every Monday and Friday at 7 PM Central, so if you ever want to talk about the franchise or just want to hang out, that'll be the place. Thanks, looking forward to seeing you over there. Anyway, despite this huge amount of success, there was a group of people out there that couldn't just ignore those initial stew ingredients. Something about that spoke to them. It called to them. Now that we have the initial context for the situation, we can take a closer look at this group of people and the events that unfolded after this version of the game was cancelled. And let me tell you, this was a much bigger rabbit hole than I initially thought it would be. My research for this started when I was writing for my Resident Evil Iceberg video, and from there, I got a better understanding of Resident Evil 2's development process. And that's when I came upon this Eurogamer article by Benjamin Burns, giving me my first glimpse of this story. From there, I was led to this book, The Hunt for Resident Evil 1.5 by Richard Mandel, one of the key figures in this tale. Aside from my own online research, these two are the biggest sources I'll be using for this video, so a huge shout out to them. And even after you watch this, if you still have an appetite for more of an in-depth depiction of these events, the links to these will be down below. Now, unfortunately, so much of this story occurred on websites that no longer exist and are preserved to varying degrees. On top of that, there's a film of secrecy to this, as a good chunk of the behind-the-scenes action is based on individual retellings. As such, the finer details aren't always the clearest, and depending on different accounts, might even contradict each other. But I assure you, I am confident that what I share with you is as close to the truth as possible given these circumstances. So, let's begin with... Prior to the game's development being restarted, Capcom was already promoting it with gameplay footage and screenshots. So since it would be a bit of time before the development teams could put out something worthwhile from this new direction, Capcom would continue to use what they had from the previous project to promote the game. This is because they didn't want rumors of it being cancelled going around. They didn't want devoted fans to worry. They even let journalists who were there at the first delay announcement try out the game. All of this was done to ensure the public that the game's development, albeit rocky, is still going forward. Eventually, when they were further along in development in October of 1997, they had enough to make a copy for test play and debugging purposes. This was the Biohazard 2 Beta 2, and it signaled the end of Resident Evil 1.5 as Capcom had pulled as much as it could from it. This new version is what became important. This is what the sequel is now, and they were ready to share more of it. The following month, Capcom reached out to GameFan, a popular American gaming magazine that had a good reputation for getting high-quality screenshots of upcoming titles. Capcom would send over an advanced copy of Resident Evil 2. One of the writers, Andrew Cockburn, would end up taking a copy of the game home, which was apparently a normal thing for the journalist at the publication to do. However, he did something he'd end up regretting. His magazine had this amazing opportunity to get an exclusive look at this upcoming game, one that has been long anticipated by fans. And that excitement must have gotten to him a little, to the point where he couldn't keep that sort of thing to himself. So he ended up lending that disc to a friend. And whether he knew it or not, this friend was someone who supposedly dabbled in the pirating of games. Cockburn, at the time, by his own admission, was not in the best state of mind. He lived a pretty self-destructive life and was addicted to drugs, and this lapse in judgment would extend to this decision. The magazine issue was published in December with no problem, but in the days following, the Hong Kong black market was filled with copies of an unfinished Resident Evil 2. What Capcom and pretty much every game publisher does when it lends copies of a game is inscribe unique file details on the discs they give out. This is done for this exact scenario, where they get one of these bootleg copies and trace it back to the source. Not long after, Cockburn was awoken by knocks at the door. A US Marshal and a bunch of police officers were at his home, and he was presented with a federal search warrant to take possession of his PC. The GameFan offices were raided, and charges were pressed. Cockburn, of course, lost both his job and his reputation. He became isolated from friends and peers as he had now become radioactive, putting the publication, his colleagues, and to an extent, this side of the industry in jeopardy. Because of him, the Biohazard 2 Beta 2 disc was now out there. This was the first disc related to the game's development that would be leaked, and it initiated a domino effect that would impact this story in a number of ways. The following month after this incident, Resident Evil 2 was released and became a hit. All of that waiting, that hype, was finally delivered upon, and fans finally got what was promised to them. Well, mostly. The vast majority were ecstatic to be playing this long-awaited sequel, but certain hardcore fans, such as Alzair, a name you're going to become very familiar with, would notice that some things weren't adding up. After playing through it, they realized that certain scenes or aspects of the game were different than how they remembered them being advertised. This was at a time where it would be difficult to try to find old gameplay footage that Capcom had put out. But what these fans did have were magazines. magazines that indeed did depict a different Resident Evil than what was released. As a result, Alzair and so many others like him went online to try to find answers. And so, like pretty much every treasure story out there, a huge chunk of the journey involves unraveling the mystery. Does this thing even exist? And if so, will it live up to its legend? Is it worth investing your hopes and dreams into? And to what extent will someone go to get it? The early days of the hunt involved a small number of people. Despite most fans playing the game and not questioning anything, interest in this tale of a cancelled version of Resident Evil 2 started gaining traction on various web forums where like-minded individuals gathered. A reminder that 1.5 was supposed to be forgotten. It was not what Capcom wanted people to focus on. As such, once development had progressed and they had more of Resident Evil 2 to show off, they pulled everything related to 1.5 from their website and only pretty much released footage related to this new updated version. Even fan sites that kept track of what media Capcom released would remove whatever they previously had once they noticed these changes on the site. This resulted in an initial massive loss of media that was just added to the pile of treasure that the community would search for. As previously mentioned, these fan discussions of what may be out there were held on various websites in the early years, and the crowd would migrate from one to another as time went on. Evil Online was the first popular hub dedicated to 1.5. This was where a lot of the leading community members first emerged, as many would go on to become prominent in their own right later. It was also here where a copy of the leaked disc from the GameFan incident was first uploaded for others to download. However, it was quickly taken down so as to not upset Capcom. Biohazard Extreme was another early site, and it was the first to have flash animation, so that really set it apart from the competition as their dynamic layout was a huge appeal. It is also notable because its creator, Evil Lude, found a clean copy of the demo from the GameFan incident for sale in Italy. This was a big find at the time, as it made the data on that disc more widely available to this initial community. Re-Horror, later renamed Rely on Horror, was one of the more clickbaity of the websites, as it led a very profit-focused approach with tons of ads, tabloid-like headlines, and supposed exclusives. It also got a reputation for being a beacon of drama, which sort of foreshadows what's to come later on. One of its biggest controversies involved the French site Survivor, which is more of an information resource site created by Jérôme Chagnon, who used the alias Wesker. We'll talk more about this site later, but what happened was that a top member of Re-Horror understood a bit of French and would take big chunks of Chagnon's findings and pass it off as their own info. This resulted in Chagnon making his website layout in Photoshop so that the text can't be easily copied and pasted into translators. This was just one of many such incidents, as the founder and admins would consistently get into toxic arguments with others. It got so bad that members of the community have blamed this website as a reason for why Capcom wasn't really involved with Resident Evil fan sites anymore, of which there were now many. Too many to keep track of at the time. And that's where Resites came into play. It was a directory hub, one that led to a bunch of other sites that held 1.5 content. And then there's White Umbrella and BioFlames. White Umbrella was one of the more expansive sites, as it had forums where valuable pieces of 1.5 media were kept secured, where users could download files, and it even had a dedicated FTP server for those downloads. It was a wiki-like site for all things Resident Evil, and it was where most of the community would go once other sites died. BioFlames took the best aspects of others and put them together, also drawing in a huge chunk of the community as other sites dwindled. It earned legitimacy and respect for the consistent information and discussions that were held there, and for hosting a ton of 1.5 material. We'll focus more on these two sites soon enough, but let's go back to the hunt itself. Fans were able to eventually figure out that in late 1996, Capcom of Japan sent Capcom USA a copy of Resident Evil 1.5. It was obviously unfinished, with a lot missing and only 17 out of 41 rooms being playable, but it was just needed for promotional purposes. These copies would become appropriately known as the 40% builds, or the raw builds. But once Capcom decided to restart development, these weren't really useful anymore, especially after the Resident Evil 2 demo was received. It's not known what exactly happened to the copies of the 40% builds, but in one way or another, the ones that weren't trashed were likely held onto by employees, and they probably gave those copies to very close friends. Either way, what ended up happening was that very few video game collectors would get their hands on these copies. They would hold onto them privately, not just for their rarity, but also because they feared retribution from Capcom. If their copy was leaked and could somehow be traced back to them, well, you already know what happened with the GameFan incident. This level of secrecy made it much more difficult for the community to get their hands on one of these copies. But they were in fact out there, and rumors about these collectors were spreading all around the forums. Someone named Edponge would repeat a story over the years about how he had been close to a leaked copy of 1.5. Around the turn of the century, they were scouting for ISO copies of PlayStation games to burn onto discs. That's when he noticed that some people had prototypes of games for trade. Curious, he asked around if anyone had a copy of Resident Evil 1.5. Two prominent members reached out to him to share that they traded a lot for one from someone else there. They didn't trade it with Edponge, but they gave him the user's email address. He contacted them, and for proof, the user sent in pictures of the game being played in their living room. However, they had no interest in trading the game, and seemed to more so just want to gloat that they had a copy and Edponge didn't. Over the next 2 months, Edponge repeatedly asked the original two users for trade, but they eventually ghosted him. He wasn't really in the 1.5 scene around these early days, but he was in gaming communities and had rare collector contacts. As such, he garnered a reputation to the point where all of the big 1.5 community members trusted him and his story. It lined up with a lot of things they've heard about these collectors. Don't worry, we have a lot to talk about concerning them later. Something else the community figured out was the construction of the demo video that Capcom USA showed off at the 1997 E3 convention. It was put together through multiple different means. It had gameplay from their copy of the 40% build, and footage that Capcom of Japan sent them of what appeared to be a more advanced version of 1.5. This turned out to be the final build, the furthest the game got before being scrapped. Although the percentage is debated, an estimated 80% of the game was finished, and this version was thus dubbed the 80% build. Additionally, they also used footage sent to them from Japan of the Biohazard 2 Beta 1, as development in this newer direction was progressing more at that point. Initially, from what the community gathered, it led to speculation of a hybrid version of the game. This wasn't the case for this video, but there did in fact exist a hybrid version. It never left its home Japanese office and was strictly used for development purposes. It itself would change as development went on, turning into the Biohazard 2 Trial Edition with all the 1.5 data being hidden away. Yet, for some reason, the American demo version doesn't have the concealed 1.5 data at all. It was completely removed, with that data being deleted entirely and replaced. It's inconsistencies like this that have added difficulty to the hunt. Another example is the April 1998 issue of Next Level magazine that showed a closer look at Resident Evil 2's development. It had images from the 1.5 final build, including never-before-seen ones. Most notably, Chief Irons is shown hurt and with gray hair instead of brown. This caused a huge discussion online, as some fans thought that the hair was a result of a misprint. But the fact that these images existed and were printed after the release of Resident Evil 2 proved that a build of 1.5 was still kept by Capcom. It also proved that they weren't as closed off to letting people know about the development process. Then, that August, Capcom of Japan re-released the director's cut of Biohazard. The original director's cut was initially made as an apology for Resident Evil 2's delay. It had new content, such as the arrange mode, that moved around items and enemies, giving a further challenge to experienced players while they waited for the game's sequel. This re-release added DualShock support for PlayStation, but the notable thing here was the extra disc in the box. The original director's cut had a Biohazard 2 Trial Edition CD. This one, however, had what was called the Biohazard Complete Disc. It allowed players to download completed save data for the first 2 games, but more importantly here, it let them look at footage of 2's prototype. 4 clear video recordings of 1.5 in action. Footage from 4 major areas of the game, all here for fans to witness. As miraculous and as huge of a resource this was, it was also the last they would get. From this point forward, Capcom was essentially done with 1.5 and would release no further media for it. The fans were now officially on their own. This didn't discourage some from trying to change their mind though. Among the first public calls for movement was a post by Jolan Martinez on Usenet, September 6, 1998, titled, "Please help us get Resident Evil 1.5 released." It was a call to action. They believed that if enough people showed their support, they could get Capcom to see that releasing 1.5 would be beneficial for everyone. This didn't really go anywhere and was indicative of how these early efforts to reach Capcom would end. The community was desperate for information, and thus there would be those who tried to prey on that desperation for their own purposes, whether it be for attention or just to get a rise out of people. The first 1.5 hoax was when Usenet user Road Steel Rickles claimed to have bought a pirated copy of the game. This game rocks. It is so much better than the regular Part 2. The Black Cop in 1.5 is one of the main characters. He isn't injured when you find him. He's prowling the RPD with a gun, just like Leon. There are a bunch of cops still alive. The voice of Leon is totally different. These claims would fall apart non-long after. Sorry, but that's a bunch of BS. No completed copies of RE 1.5 have left Capcom's offices. But if a copy did make it out somehow, it could be made into 1 million backup copies and everyone could enjoy it. If only it could have been that easy. This was the first of many hoaxes that the 1.5 scene would have to deal with. There were also others who tried to be more convincing, trying to use the community's hopes against them to get a nice payday out of them, essentially scamming them. The first case of fraud came in January 1999, when the moderators of the Resident Evil fan site, The Right Game, were contacted by someone claiming to be from Japan. They supposedly had a version of Biohazard 2 Beta 1. Attached to their message were 3 gameplay clips from this build. Each was grainy, low quality, and short. The moderators would then ask a few clarifying questions about the game, but this seller would get guarded and sketchy, as if they didn't expect any pushback and just wanted to make the exchange as fast as possible. The moderators didn't end up trusting them, and the deal went nowhere. Fortunately, there were some high points around this time. Rays of sunshine that energized the scene. Jerome Chagnon of Survivor was watching TV on the Tech and Games channel when he saw what was unmistakable 1.5 footage. Alongside it was early Resident Evil 2 gameplay, even older than Biohazard 2 Beta 2. He started recording right away and fortunately got most of the segment. What he had captured turned out to be a rebroadcast of the 1997 E3 Resident Evil 2 promo, the one that we discussed earlier. This was huge, as the quality of the most complete footage from the event up to this point was poor at best, considering the capturing technology at the time. With this footage, fans put together the full thing from multiple sources, filling in the gaps of what was left out. Another key moment originated on the BioFlames website, one of the biggest growing sites for 1.5 information. It was here where fans would post what they could that helped in the search. But this website's most early claim to fame was when the owner, Kim Larson, was contacted by a certain user in late 1999. This user claimed they have a friend that works at Capcom of Japan, and as a result, they were able to take pictures of the final build of 1.5. These 138 pictures became the In Flames collection, legitimate cell phone camera pictures of the game. This was at a time when cell phone cameras were relatively new, so these pictures were recent, and they provided a lot of unique context and clues for what was previously unknown. It was an absolute goldmine, and Larson would ask if there was more that could be shared. However, the user stated that they no longer had contact with their Capcom friend. This is probably because that friend likely broke a Capcom privacy agreement, such as an NDA, by allowing their buddy to take those pictures. This infringed on Capcom's property rights, and could potentially have led to their firing or a lawsuit. Either way, these pictures were out there, and the community analyzed every single pixel. They contained valuable information about brand new areas, such as most of the RPD's second floor, something that really only exists publicly in these photos, as more media of these sections have yet to be found to this day. But before he released all of this, Kim Larson got some advice from someone that was rising to prominence among the Bioflames and 1.5 community as a whole, Alzair. He was a very important player as he had a bunch of useful connections that would help in the hunt. He advised Larson to not release all of the pictures, and Larson agreed. 138 of them were released, but less than a dozen were kept secret. This way, it helped them verify future claims of whether or not a person was legitimate, as only they and the owners of the actual game would know of certain details. This turned out to be a very smart move in hindsight, as they would have to deal with many different hoaxes in the following decade. That's right, a whole decade. The century was coming to a close, and they were nowhere near getting their hands on the game. Funny enough, two reporters from Electric Gaming Monthly, John Ricciardi and Mark McDonald, were able to do this earlier that year. They had visited Japan to cover the release of Resident Evil 3, and once they were inside the Capcom offices, they asked about 1.5 and were given exclusive access to the final build of the game. No copies were made and no pictures were allowed, but they got permission to play it in the studio. It was definitely one of my most memorable experiences during the PS1 era, especially since we were really rabid Biohazard fans back then, and pretty much nobody outside of Capcom had been given a chance to try it. They were blown away by what they were playing and were so immersed in the moment that they actually forgot to take notes, something that would frustrate the investigative side of the community. So many people would have killed to get this kind of opportunity, but as I mentioned, the number of hoaxes would only increase with time. Fans grew more and more skeptical as these types of claims popped up one after another. Hey, if you're enjoying the video so far, please do consider subscribing. It really does help out a lot. Thanks. Now back to the video. On July 8th, 2001, there was an eBay listing by someone named Yama Blaster. The listing had a playable copy of Resident Evil 1.5 for $1,025. This caused a big stir amongst the community as everyone debated the legitimacy of it. Many thought it was either Biohazard 2 Beta 2 or the Biohazard 2 Trial Edition. There was no way they actually had 1.5. Eventually, on July 11th, someone by the name of Game Nights would buy it, and turmoil ensued as the listing was removed entirely. People, wanting to figure out what had happened, contacted both the seller and buyer for more information. This caused the seller to put out a statement. Understanding buyer, great to deal with, heard my side of the story. This strongly implies that what was sold was in fact not Resident Evil 1.5. The general consensus is that what the seller put up was actually the Biohazard Director's Cut, with the complete disc that had the 1.5 clips. It's believed that the seller purposely didn't accurately describe the listing to use the online hype of the game for promotion. It was also around this time that someone who would go by the name The Curator was contacted by a private collector who claimed to have a copy of the game. However, he turned their offer down because Resident Evil 2 was already out, and he really didn't know much about 1.5. He thought it was the Biohazard 2 Beta 2 copy that everyone knew about already, so he didn't think it'd be worth much. If only he had known. But don't worry, this won't be his last chance. Then, in late 2002, tragedy struck when the White Umbrella site went down due to host provider issues. The owner, Scream, had to relaunch it from a backup. This caused a lot of 1.5 media and information to become lost. It took months to recover most of it, but there was still a good chunk missing even when the site would eventually shut down for good. But when the site came back online, a download of a clean copy of Biohazard 2 Beta 2 was made available for everyone to download, courtesy of Deacon Willis, a prominent community member. The site also had other desirable downloads for the community. Wesker's report video from Code Veronica X, the Resident Evil 3 Trial Edition, and the Japanese Biohazard 2 Trial Edition, which was supplied by user Jethro Hughes. This was big for the community, as only a small handful of site admins across the fan sites had this copy, and even though credit went to Jethro Hughes, a staff member named Colvin would claim that he was the one that provided this copy and would loudly state this whenever he could. He claimed that he got it from Jerome Chagnon and then promptly gave it to Scream to upload. Whatever the truth here is, it was an indicator of the power plays that were going on behind the scenes and foretold the site's future. On February 4th, my birthday, Deacon Willis uploaded new clips of 1.5 that most people haven't seen yet, causing a huge boom in traffic. These clips were from the 1997 Hyper PlayStation Remix magazines. This publication was very close with Capcom, and multiple issues up until the end of that year came with discs that contained video footage of 1.5. A new hunt for these discs began to get the cleanest, highest quality videos possible. They became vital to understanding the world of 1.5. As before this, a lot of those sections were only seen in low quality camera footage or short glimpses from Capcom promos. The most important was the Leon in the Tunnel video, as it had previously not been seen before and was key to providing context in terms of the environment and gameplay here, since it was from the final version of the game. Then, on July 14th, Jerome Chagnon got a copy of the March 1997 issue of Famitsu magazine, the one where Resident Evil 2 was announced to be delayed. This contained coverage of the press conference and some pictures of journalists playing the demo. These pictures had what is pretty much the only official look at the inside of RPD's second floor elevator hallway. As excited as everyone was for these past 3 public discoveries, they would unfortunately be the last significant ones they would get for a long time. It was during these times that, with no new news, the scene started turning against each other, taking out their frustrations of the halted hunt progress on their peers. People didn't always share perspectives, and during this period where there was almost nothing else to do, it was easy for people to get upset with each other across multiple sites. There was even infighting amongst administrators as well. Despite White Umbrella's success, it wasn't without its problems. The website was founded by a Resident Evil fan named Scream, who was smart and effective in his own right. He had extracted backgrounds from Resident Evil 3 at a time when people didn't really know how to do that. Behind the scenes though, Scream conducted amongst his staff what can be best described as a toxic work environment. This was because everything was a competition for him, and he spread that to those underneath him. It was an elitist organization in every sense of the word, as they even had a diagram called the Hierarchy of Power that organized all of the staff members. Among them was Colvin, the youngest member of the team. I'm specifically mentioning him and his role here because he will make a grand reappearance. But to give you an idea of how Scream treated his staff and others, here's a quote from Colvin himself. Scream was calm, intelligent, and knew how to get things done. In hindsight, he was actually an elitist who forced everyone to compete. But I admired him and tried to earn his respect because I was the youngest member. Scream made fun of me in private discussions, so we didn't really talk a lot. But one incident stands out in my mind. He obtained a webcam pic of Jerome Chagnon, aka Wesker of Survivor, and showed it to me during a discussion on RE internet domination. The man in the picture was skinny, balding with glasses, and in his 40s. Being a kid, I was immediately frightened by the prospect of competing with a resourceful man. But when I voiced my concern, Scream responded casually by saying we had nothing to worry about. He looked cheap, like McDonald's. That instilled confidence and made me laugh. In early 2004, the Scream and Colvin feud hit its peak as they publicly argued over what was happening at White Umbrella and who deserved credit for stuff. This spectacle would also take place on other fan sites, as Colvin would also attack users and administrators of those sites. This caused a big flame war in the community. A reason why this type of infighting was a common occurrence was because every single admin wanted to be the one that would finally find that missing piece of the puzzle, to be the one to give the community what they've been searching for so long, to go down in this niche's history. And if they can't have that yet, they at least want credit for what they bring forth. This hostility trickled down to the community itself, as everyone else also wanted their contributions to be greater than others. After a few months of arguments, Colvin actually came out with an apology to everyone, except for Scream. He explained that he was going through his own personal issues and suffered from bipolar disorder. He had been using the community as an outlet, taking it out on them. Despite how people would apologize or move on from arguments, this community was anything but forgetful. They would hold on to grudges and how members would argue against them for years. This was just the start of that. Something else that happened around these drier years was the more frequent closure of the fan sites. In June of 2003, an issue caused Biohazard Extreme to be wiped and its data deleted. In a final post from the admin, they stated that they were sick of what the community had become and didn't want to re-upload the 4 GB of site data as he didn't have the strength to go through with it. A reminder that this was 2003. 4 GB was a lot back in the day and would have taken a very long time to upload. And the most notable closures came from White Umbrella. On March 15th, 2004, due to the constant fighting between the two staff teams, they shut down the Right Game site, which was run on their server. This was a huge blow for Colvin, as he had been working close with that team to try to make the site a success. Not too long after this is when White Umbrella itself would implode. At that point, every single staff member was involved in their own projects and was being pulled away. So given this and the constant infighting, White Umbrella would be shut down and the staff would join other teams. With this, BioFlames was now the one standing definite Resident Evil 1.5 website, where so many would migrate towards. Having so much of the scene in one place proved to be both a blessing and a detriment. In May of 2004, an Emu Paradise forum moderator named Mushindo claimed she might have a copy of 1.5 somewhere in her collection. She was a respected moderator, so this claim had some credibility to it. Alzair tried to contact her, but unfortunately, he wasn't the only one. What this resulted in was her getting absolutely bombarded with messages from all kinds of people. The polite and unruly, the understanding, and the demanding. She even got insults and death threats over keeping it for herself. It was too much. Internet hounding isn't unheard of now, but this was back in 2004 when the internet was a significantly smaller space. So this was stressful for her, to say the least. It got so bad that she had to take a 2-week vacation from her day job to mentally deal with this stress, along with an even longer time away from the 1.5 scene. Annoyed by what the community had done, but still undeterred, Alzair continued to message and reassure her to keep the conversation going. And after some time, on August 20th, she told him that she would look through her entire collection to see if she did indeed have a copy. This was great news, but Alzair would then go on to do something that he would really regret. He made a public statement on the matter about how negotiations with Mushindo have resumed, and how she's very confident she has a copy. And even if she doesn't, she has a few Japanese connections that could serve as good leads for them. He would also go on to scold those who messaged her the first time, even if they did have good intentions. He tried to explain to the crowd how scary something like that would be for a regular person. Unfortunately, what people took from all of this was that Mushindo was back on the scene. And so the exact same thing happened again. And this time, it was enough to scare her off for good. After a few days, she would stop responding to Alzair and would then leave her own forum and disappear from the internet, never to be heard from under that identity again. This could have been it. She could have had the game, and the hunt for that copy would have been over right here in 2004. And this video would have been significantly shorter. But the community, in their ambitions, tripped and ended up hurting themselves. A top community member known as Carnivol would continue to search her out in the months that followed, but no luck. He gave up because he exhausted all of his resources, and at a point, it seemed like he was crossing a line into stalking territory. And that made him very uncomfortable, as he didn't want to be a part of that. I'll say this line again so you could really remember it for later. Carnivol didn't continue in the search because it felt like he was stalking someone, and that made him uncomfortable. Anyway, this whole entire Mushindo situation was a reason why Alzair and the other prominent community members kept their leads and top contacts close to their chests from this point forward. Then, towards the end of the year, a user known as Black Crow would start to recreate the game's maps as best he could and would update them as more and more information would come out. He was the first to do this, and it proved to be a super useful resource for others trying to study the game. But this was just an advancement based on what the community already knew. As they were about to go into the new year, frustration kept on growing, with no new developments being made on the hunt itself. As the number of claimers and dead leads piled up, Alzair and the rest of the community heads were reaching their limit. After yet another promising lead led to absolutely nothing, Alzair would post this on Bioflames. Gah! I'm sick of these people. I hate dealing with these damn claimers. They are all a bunch of I'm just so sick and tired of dealing with these people and their attention-getting lies. I swear, we need to just have 1.5 finally come to us so this can all be over. Alzair's position was understandable. He and so many others had already been at this for so long, and they don't really have much to show for it in the grand scheme of things. He, in particular, would always hear someone out, even if their story was a bit sketchy, just in case maybe they were serious. They hardly ever were. In fact, one user in particular, MadGaz, would go on to apologize for being one of these claimers, stating that they did it solely because they were jealous of Alzair and how knowledgeable he and his friends were about the game. Fortunately, Alzair and the community would get a break of sorts the following year. On May 29, 2005, a user known as Sardelchka posted pictures on Bioflames of what seemed to be Resident Evil 1.5 running on a PlayStation. Before things got out of hand, Alzair made a post to remind everyone of the last time the community messed up and let something like this slip away. So he warned them not to message the user and let him talk to them. Everyone actually complied this time. These images turned out to be from the Biohazard 2 Trial Edition. This version was already known about and there were tons of copies out there. However, unbeknownst to the community, this version had extra 1.5 files on them, but they were previously inaccessible. Sardelchka had figured out a way to extract that data. Factory Site A and B were the only rooms missing, which was because that data was saved over when the game was updated. It was unfortunately overwritten and lost. There was a lot more too. A 7th debugging stage, swapped out rooms, extra rooms, and the lab P1 West Hallway was almost perfectly preserved. According to Alzair, those files generated a lot of hype. We had guys recreating backgrounds and people getting excited. It was just a really good time to be involved in the search. This was absolutely amazing, as fans could now actually go through these fabled rooms themselves on their own hardware. But these rooms were still largely empty. Despite how big of a find this all was, there was still a lot of the game left. These were clues, but a lot of guesswork was still needed to get closer to that final picture. All of this info was data and images. Nothing about the puzzles, story, dialogue, item drops, or enemies. This led to an uncomfortable thought amongst some members of the community. Maybe Resident Evil 1.5 was truly lost, as this example showed how the development team would save over 1.5 data with newer Resident Evil 2 data. Maybe this will be the case in any other future finds, if there are any. So maybe, what if they shifted their focus instead to recreating the game itself as best they could? This was a seed of an idea that was planted here in the community. A year later, on November 29, 2006, Alzair got a tip from a trusted associate named RandomWab that confirmed that there's at least one genuine copy of Resident Evil 1.5 out there. But RandomWab didn't post this info on Bioflames. He instead posted it on Junker HQ, a much smaller site away from the eyes of most of the fanbase. The 1.5 community know of only a few betas, all of which are not for sale under any circumstances. If those betas were to find themselves to the public, the original beta testers could find themselves in a lot of trouble with Capcom. Each beta Capcom issue has, to my knowledge, a small file which contains certain code that Capcom can use to see who was the beta tester. Capcom used this with the beta tester who leaked the early build of the final Resident Evil 2, and that guy almost got put behind bars due to the agreement he signed with Capcom. Until those agreements run out, we will not see a rip of betas. Now, the betas exist, however, the people who own them either won't risk releasing them or they are within private collector hands. This is true of the 3 known copies of 1.5. 2 are in private collector circles, and 1 is still with the ex-Capcom employee. This was already rumored, but it supported a tip that Alzer previously got from another source, Le Collectionneur, the chief administrator of Biohazard France. They told Alzer about how they were 99% sure that Capcom USA had at one point a copy of the game, according to his in-depth research of Capcom Europe and the European Resident Evil 2 license holder, Virgin Mastertronic. So to Alzer and his buddies, they knew something that the rest of the community did not. The Resident Evil 1.5 discs are definitely real, and they're out there. It's now up to them to keep this information secret and safe so that they can attain it. As for the community itself at that point, they were getting tired. After many years of discouragements and almost zero developments since the 2005 Sardelchka findings, morale was weak. Many believed they weren't going to get any progress and that everything they had at that point was the best they were going to get. They wanted an update, something new, something exciting, no matter what it was or where it came from. And so the monkey's paw curled, and in August of 2007, an estate sale was held for someone who had recently passed away. We don't know where it was held, but it was local, so there was no online listings on eBay or anywhere else, as the promotion for it was likely only in regional newspapers. On top of that, this was an in-house auction that someone would have to physically be in to bid. But what was so special about this auction was that it was for the estate of a former Capcom employee, and amongst their possessions were developer assets, including a copy of Resident Evil 1.5. The exact details of the event itself are a mystery, as only secondhand accounts have been shared, some of which contradict each other. For example, in his research, Richard Mandel states that a source claimed that there were multiple different builds of the game in this auction, but others claimed that this source was purposefully lying about this to try to discredit Mandel's efforts. Nonetheless, what did in fact happen was a group of local collectors pitching in to purchase these lots together. Someone got the original 1.5 disc, and the rest got copies. The disc that was bought is thought to be the very last trace of the original disc, the one that came from Capcom directly. The copies themselves, however, were marked to look as close to it as possible. Not long ago, I mentioned that Random Wob's post talked about an ex-Capcom employee that had a copy. It can't be confirmed whether or not this deceased employee was the one they were referring to, but in the US, death absolves any NDAs. So the new owners of the disc could now share their copies amongst their circles without much fear of direct legal action from Capcom. It would be difficult to track them down now. And one of these proud new owners was actually aware of the 1.5 scene. In late September, a friend of .50cal, a member of the Assembler forum, reached out to ask him if he was still interested in Resident Evil 1.5, because a contact of his managed to somehow get a copy of the game and was looking to sell it. Despite previously saying he would pay $2,000 himself for the game, .50cal was in financial trouble at the time, so he got Alzer and the rest of the crew together to talk about this potential deal. Of course, they all requested proof and adequate vetting before money was exchanged, but they did pledge a certain amount. Unfortunately, verifying the claim and getting the money together took a while. They were able to raise a whopping $4,000. But when .50cal reached out to his friend on October 10th, he found out that someone else bought it before they could. It was heartbreaking news to hear, but even worse, it was sold for a meager $300. After all these years, after all these setbacks, here was this amazing opportunity to get their hands on this coveted demo. They were so close. They were so close. And now they'll never get to see. A few days before the team got this unfortunate news, on October 4th, the PlayStation Museum website uploaded never-before-seen looks at 1.5. It didn't take long for this site to reach BioFlames and the admins there. The owner of the site was known only as the Curator, and it would become obvious that this was who managed to beat them to the purchase. The crew set forth on a plan where Alzair and Carnivol would make contact with the Curator to discuss the game. This also came with a warning to the BioFlames community to once again let them handle things. Talks were good at first, as the Curator agreed to meet with them, and he even shared game files to prove the legitimacy of his copy. They asked questions, and so did he, as they helped him with the debug menu and with translations. Later in the month, the Curator would then tease something on his site, that something big was going to happen on Halloween. This caused a lot of excitement in the community, as many hoped that this big surprise was going to be a downloadable copy of the game. However, it ended up being more clear images, with a promise of more to follow as the crew shared debug codes with him to access other areas of the game. The crew would go along with whatever the Curator asked them, as they had hoped that all this cooperation would lead to him eventually sharing the disc with them. It also gave us hope maybe things can start happening now. Someone who is not a Capcom employee has, for better or worse, got a copy of the game. Later, on the assembler forums, a user named Tintin made a post trying to spread the word on just how valuable a copy of 1.5 would be. .50cal noticed this and, probably wanting to entice a deal, showed this to the Curator. But the Curator would just end up asking the site admins to take that post down, since he was only in talks with BioFlames and had no interest in discussing a sale with Assembler. This sort of soured the deal Alzair and his group were trying to make, as the Curator then approached them with a price. A non-negotiable $10,000. It was too much, so the crew had no other option but to walk away. On November 22nd, a YouTube video was posted by someone called Goro Masida. It consists of someone booting up a PlayStation 1 that's running Resident Evil 1.5 while Hot Chocolate's You Sexy Thing plays. The song selection is notable because of the lyrics, mainly I believe in miracles. In the comments, the poster stated that the game is for sale for $1,000,000 yen. This video was then quickly shared to the assembler forums by user PS Monitor. .50cal was quick to realize what was actually going on. PS Monitor was the Curator. $1,000,000 yen at the time was $10,000 US, the offer that the Curator made. Also, the channel's name came from a file that the Curator had shared with them of an Umbrella ID card that had the name Goro Masida. The Curator was no longer content with just owning this thing that these people have long yearned for. This video was actually a response to a forum user who had said they believed in miracles, that they believed 1.5 would be released somehow. The Curator is now rubbing it in their faces. And this was just the beginning. 3 days later, a group led by .50cal was put together on the Horror is Alive forum. This site, by the way, was an up-and-coming one on the scene at the time. It was put together by .50cal, Carnivol, and IGAS, and would eventually take the #1 spot from BioFlames as the top 1.5 site. Anyway, this team wanted to give it a second shot, to try to get a deal out of the Curator. .50cal was still broke at the time, but he was encouraged by others, including Alzair. They assured him that if he could get him to lower the price, then others can pool in some money as well. Not long after, a user named Wesker Walker made an account on the Horror is Alive forums and quickly posted information from the curator's game copy. It was very obvious that Wesker Walker was just the curator in disguise. He already got all the info he could about the game from Bioflames, so he was trying to do the same here on the Horror is Alive. After some discussion with the other admins, .50cal decided to just go along with it and let the curator play pretend. He would ask for Wesker Walker's feedback, such as how much money he thinks the curator would accept, and even held a donation drive to raise funds for the game. It ended up raising $6,000 in pledges from forum members. That's when .50cal contacted the curator himself and offered $4,000, knowing that it would be rejected. He received no response. Then, on December 7th, the curator put out a warning to everyone. This is the only version around, and I know I run the risk of losing it forever from CD deterioration if it doesn't sell. The clock was ticking. The curator had reminded everyone of a fear they had. Disk rot is when the contents of a CD become unreadable due to the chemical breakdowns of the disk itself. It takes effect around 7 to 10 years, and at that point, it had been 10 years since Resident Evil 1.5 was cancelled. The community was in a panic, so they all came together and, after a week, actually raised the $10,000 that the curator originally asked for. Seeing how badly they wanted it, seeing them approach him with all of this money, the curator changed his mind. They were all so worried. This disc really meant a lot to them. It was incredibly valuable to them. $10,000 was now no longer enough. He wanted more. A healthy sum, as he put it. The deal, once again, had fallen apart, and .50cal could do nothing but walk away. On December 23rd, an eBay listing was put up by the curator. Resident Evil 1.5 for sale to the highest bidder. Starting price, $125,000. Not a single offer was made, so he pulled the listing before the end date. .50cal would have this to say about the curator and his actions. He's shown that he is nothing but a child throughout all this, trying to get people's hopes up that a real sale will come, while saying he's interested in selling it and then ignoring real offers from the community. Alzair, years later, would have a more introspective analysis of what happened. I think he had good intentions and just wanted to preserve the game on his website. Everybody getting onto him just frustrated him, scared him, and made him spiteful in the end. But I don't blame him for that. If I had piles of emails, messages, and threats demanding a copy of a game, it would scare me away too. I wouldn't want to be friendly to those people either. This was the closest the community was to getting a copy of 1.5, and it was now out of reach. That's why the idea of just trying to recreate the game themselves gained a lot of support when this deal fell through. The first public suggestion of a reverse-engineered 1.5 was made on Bioflames by Darkside05, 2 years before this incident. On July 1st, 2005, he stated how big Sardelja's findings were at the time and how this idea was now possible. The community had data for most of the later parts of the game, but only images and videos for the rest, not to mention all the unknown variables. Fans were also still learning how to utilize the different game files in general. They continued to dig deep into Resident Evil 2 and its various demos to find bits of data that were left over from 1.5. These elements remained because the developers probably just closed off access to that stuff to speed up the development process. Also, modding was already a thing in the community for other retail games, as people would do this to fix bugs, use cheats, or modify skins. In late 2004, Jerome Chagnon posted a virtual walkthrough of how the game would have probably played. And on August 31st of that year, Colvin posted the first Resident Evil 1.5 FAQ that included a text walkthrough of parts of the game. Then, the following year, on May 17, a fan hacker known as Mark Grass posted the very first GameShark codes for both Biohazard 2 Beta 2 and Beta 2 Trial Edition on Bioflames. 2 weeks later is when Sardelja would publish their methods of extracting room data. This helped tremendously to mod other Resident Evil games, as it was easier to recreate rooms since they could now extract room backgrounds. It was the beginning of room modding and what would later be called room definition table, being able to alter the room itself. All of this information was there for the community to utilize, bringing forth a new chapter in the hunt focused on recreation. This growing interest would lead to the RE123 site being created in 2008. Founded and moderated by Enrico Marini, it was the first big hub for the hacking and modding side of the community. It is here where many tech-savvy fans came together to share, discuss, and learn. Over time, they understood more and more about these early Resident Evil games, until they were fairly confident that they could start recreations of 1.5. All these games use the same engines, with each being an upgrade from the last. If 1.5's engine was in between 1 and 2, then 1.5 could be supported on 2's engine. In March of 2008, the Dark Biohazard mod was released by fan modder Dominion and friends. This was the first total P mod for these older games. Other mods before this mostly just had skin swaps, but this one was substantial for everything else it provided. It had new characters, new enemies, and even new rooms. On top of that, the general vibe of the mod was inspired by 1.5 specifically. Then, in June, the Project Safehouse manual was released. It was the go-to guide that taught modders how to change character skins, rooms, and even how to make their own characters for Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3. Thanks to all these efforts, modding 1.5 was now more possible than ever, and fans got to work. A year later, on September 15, 2009, a man by the name of Martin Biohazard posted something substantial on RE123 that would send shockwaves across the scene, quickly reaching Bioflames and The Horror Is Alive. On that day, all of the data that the community had gathered over the years resulted in a Resident Evil 2 mod that he posted. It let fans play 3 dozen Resident Evil 1.5 rooms and made alpha and beta Resident Evil 2 rooms available for the first time ever. Yes, it was buggy, and the game sometimes crashed, but people could finally play it. After all this time, their hopes and dreams came to life. Furthermore, this mod right here has set the groundwork for what was to come. On September 9th, 2009, Enrico Marini created a new Elsa Walker skin that was of greater quality than the one everyone was using. The 2001 skin created by Dominion. Resident Evil 2 Claire was the base, but the rest was original to what Elsa would have looked like. There was also the work of C2 Kyo, the best Resident Evil background artist in the scene, who perfectly captured the vibe of the early game's backgrounds. Having previously worked on the cancelled Dark Biohazard mod, he had been busy with his own project. And on March 29, 2010, he posted the first of a series of recreated 1.5 backgrounds. Both this skin and these backgrounds caught the attention of Martin Biohazard, and he was able to get permission from them to implement these into his mod, giving fans a more authentic feeling of what the original thing would have been like. Then, on April 11th, a community fan hacker named Kiji Dragon rediscovered a bunch of character dialogue from 1.5. This was first put out there in the year 2000 on Survivor, but many people had either forgotten or missed this since the site at the time was only in French. Kiji Dragon also managed to retrieve a bunch of zombie noises. These, of course, were quickly integrated into people's projects. The modding scene was abuzz during these years, and that let the 1.5 community have something to focus on while there were still no significant breakthroughs on the hunt for the actual game. By now, 1.5 became not so niche amongst online communities as a whole. A lot of people knew about it, and that meant that more malicious people would mess with the community by claiming to have the game, or that they know a guy who knows a guy who knows a guy. Some of these claimers were also believed to be the curator, still up to his old antics. On November 19th, 2010, someone new on the Assembler forums claimed to have a copy and wanted to sell it for $3,000. No lower, no bargain, no trades. Price is final. Anyone interested had to contact him by email within 3 days. But before that time, they would claim that the game was sold after the site moderators took down his post for breaking the rules. Then, on the 2nd of June 2011, an eBay Australia seller named Samcro put up a listing of what they claimed to be a copy of the game, alongside the Biohazard Director's Cut, with a starting bid of $50 Australian. The disc had preview of the Biohazard sequel proposed by Capcom, written in big Japanese lettering. The description also stated that the disc was broken and couldn't be played anymore. People tried to reach out to the seller to help them attempt to retrieve the information on the disc, or even to help fix it. The seller, however, repeatedly pushed back by stating it had hardware issues. They supposedly got the game on trademe.co.nz in 2003, and it stopped working in 2005. Everyone was skeptical of this, but the price did raise to $150 from bids, and that's when the seller posted screenshots from their copy. Kiji Dragon was quick to share that the picture was actually a screenshot from the curator's Goro Masita video. The listing would then go down before the final day of the auction, but Samcro stated that this was only because the discs had been sold. If all these instances were in fact the curator, then it goes in line with the lingering animosity he was feeling towards the 1.5 community at the time. In the year prior, September 16th, 2009, due to the constant harassment he was still getting, the curator removed the 1.5 footage from his YouTube channel. Others were, of course, quick to re-upload that footage. Something else that happened on that day was that a new user named Bzork would join the Horror is Alive forum and, for the next 3 years, would not say a single thing and just lurk there on the site. We'll get back to that name later when the time comes, but during this time period, the curator was getting desperate for money. He put up an eBay listing in the summer of 2011 for one of his valued collectibles, the first DTL H505 PlayStation Dev Kit, all accessories included, with a starting price of $35,000. However, it was not as valuable as he thought it would be. No one bid for it. Then, on September 4th, the curator posted a video with brand new 1.5 footage to celebrate the franchise's 15th anniversary. When asked about the footage, he stated that the video was from 2007 and that he didn't have the original disc anymore. The community's fears have come true, as this was implied to be because of disc rot. All he had now was a backup ISO image on his drive. To Alzair and the gang, the curator's recent moves implied that he's gotten desperate enough to get back into conversations. Sometime between September and October, Alzair and the Inner Circle contacted the curator, but despite his desperation, he was still on his $10,000 asking price. That, of course, didn't sit well with them, as they now had much more leverage on him. They could afford to wait him out. He seemingly couldn't. They told him about their other sources and how this copy isn't as unique as he thought it was, and that if he can't come up with a good offer, they'll just leave again, and he won't get another chance. So finally, after some back and forth, the curator relented and dropped the price. The exact number isn't known, but it's said to be either 8,000 or over 9,000. Whatever number they agreed on, the group went back and pooled their money together, with one member even putting in $6,000 themselves. They sent the money over to the curator, and that was that. A few weeks later, a package arrived at Alzair's home, a CDR containing a copy of the 40% build of Resident Evil 1.5. He invited some community friends over to experience this with him. He put the disc in his modded PlayStation, and there it was. This thing he and others have been searching for so long. He's moving around, going room to room, fighting off zombies, accessing the map and menus. It was all real. It was real. Resident Evil 5 was finally attained. This saga, going back over a decade, is finally over. Alzair and the top members of the scene finally have the game. The community finally has the... This was it? despite how much they poured into the hunt, after all these years, the game was kind of sort of a major letdown. They expected it to be broken, but not to the extent that it actually was. A lot of content they were hoping for was not there. The engine itself was also busted, so the game didn't behave as it should have. Remember that this version was never intended to be fully playable, as it was just a test demo. It was called the 40% build for a reason. As Richard Mandel would put it, when they finally got their hands on that copy of the build, they quickly realized, to their horror, that what Capcom had been saying all along was right. It was a bad game. The legend had proven to be bigger than the product. As a result, the group was left with just one question. Now what? They feared what would happen if they were to release this out to the general community. Anger and frustration. This is what they all spent so much time towards? All those years of research and anticipation for this? So what they ultimately decided to do is use the fact that this purchase was done in secrecy. No one in the community besides them knows that they have this copy. So what if they tried to fix the game themselves and then released it? With all the info they had on what the game was intended to be, they were confident that they could flesh it out so that it would be a better experience for the fans. And thus, Team IGAS was officially formed. Named after the line from the original game, I Got a Shotgun.
I got a shotgun.
At its start, it was led by Alzair and Carnivol, and they set out to gather new members for this project. Carnivol, while trying to maintain another level of secrecy, would recruit people under the name B. Zork. The team wanted to get famed background artist C2 Kyo involved, but they had left the scene at that point. Their next option was Dark Savior DXP, who had been trying to recreate Lost 1.5 background art since the mid-2000s. There was an issue with this pick though. DXP was a modder that spent a lot of time on the RE123 website. This meant that, despite his skills, the team couldn't trust him. They were under the belief that everyone at RE123 was the type of person who couldn't keep secrets, as they would want to share what they had with that side of the community, either for glory or just to have that work out there in the public. They would have been too eager to share their knowledge, so the team had pretty much closed off that entire group of people from the project. They ended up going with another talented background artist that was more to their taste, Sonic Blue, who would work exclusively for the team and the project. Given how tight-lipped the team was, the true number of members at any given time was a mystery. Additionally, there was another reason why the team decided to hold off on a release. They wanted to keep on pursuing leads to acquire data from other builds of the game, ones that were more advanced. At this point, there were 5 to 7 other different versions rumored to be out there. This way, that data could be utilized for a good use, putting together those missing pieces of the game. To do this though, discretion was of the utmost priority. If they were to put the game out there in its current state, the value of those other builds that collectors had would tank. Because they kept the whole project a secret, they would demonstrate to those collectors that they're trustworthy. As for Alzair himself, he stated that he would have personally been happy to just do a grand reveal and release the game to the public. But some of the other members of the team, particularly the ones who have put the most money in, had other ideas. They wanted to create something better than what we had, and I was happy for that to happen. This would have been the ideal scenario for the team. They work on it in secret, make it actually playable, and then reveal it to the fans that greet it with grand applause and praise. However, that plan would not pan out that well, given that it didn't take long for that veil of secrecy to be proven incredibly thin. Once again, the only people that knew they had the 1.5 disc were those top community members. These members then did something that is quite poetic, considering how all of this started. If you were, for instance, one of their friends, they might want to brag about the fact that they have this. They tell you about it, and maybe you would ask if you could have a copy, and maybe, just maybe, they send it over to you. No problem. Just like that. These friendship copies of the game were given out to only those close to the higher ranks, no one lower. So in the coming months, it was essentially an open secret among the community's elite, and it wouldn't take long for the rest of the scene to catch on to what was going on. In early April of 2012, Kiji Dragon uploaded a YouTube video of a cutscene where Leon is running down the lab's boiler room corridors. This was known footage from the Biohazard Complete disc, but the gameplay that Kiji Dragon posted was in great quality. He had also implied that he had more that he would share. As it turned out, he got this footage from someone in the higher ranks that had the game and recorded it and shared it with him. The rumor spread and the community was taken aback by this, not sure if it was true or not. Such rumors eventually found their way back to the team. In midsummer, a private collector that the team would refer to as The Source contacted them about their purchase of the game. He knew that they wanted to recreate 1.5, so he told them that he already had the copy they had, but also had access to other builds, including the final 80% one. They of course asked for proof, and he gave them data from a build that was more complete than theirs. To sweeten the deal, he also had the only prototype Biohazard Zero N64 cartridge that wasn't in the hands of Capcom or Nintendo. Needless to say, the team was very enthusiastic about making a deal with him. Negotiation talks were strong and promising at first, as the Source was willing to sell them data from the final build that they need to recreate 1.5. However, the Source wanted some guarantees. He wanted the value of his possessions to be kept. That means nothing he gave them could be leaked, or else it would hurt his collection. This request comes after a recent leak over on Facebook. On June 15th, 2 Italian users were sharing unseen images of Resident Evil 1.5. This caught the attention of the fans, causing the users to delete their messages and pictures. But not before Aleph Correa captured this interaction and shared it on The Horror is Alive. This thread, Aleph's thread, became the longest running Resident Evil 1.5 thread on any site in history. And when the conversation was translated, it revealed to everyone that 1. Someone had the game, and 2. They were planning to translate and release it to the public. This caused immediate division in the community, as many seemed hopeful that these were real pictures while others remained skeptical. Something else that caused division was what was in the pictures themselves, as fans noted that things were different from how they should have been. Aspects of the game were changed. If there was, in fact, a build out there being worked on, those people are changing it from what it originally was. By attempting to flesh out the game, they're adding assets that were never intended to be part of it. This was a sacrilegious act, especially because, once again, the common folk had no access to the game. This created an even deeper division amongst the community, splitting them between purists and those that welcomed the changes. Martin Biohazard and DXP were initially among the ones in support of the game being modified, if it meant that they would have a version of the game that would be more stable. But back to the leak itself, those images weren't posted by members of the team, but the users were close enough to have gotten pictures of the game. This made the Source nervous, and the team had to reassure him that they have it all under control, which wasn't exactly the truth. This led to a pause in negotiations, so the team could secure things internally for the Source's peace of mind. However, a second Facebook leak occurred not long after. New images from one of the Italian Facebook users were posted. These were convincing enough to convert doubters. The community at large had now accepted that a copy was out there, and an unknown team was definitely trying to modify it. This did not sit well with many people. Purists wanted the game ASAP, even if it was a buggy mess. Modders wanted to dig through the files to see what else was hidden in there. Their core belief was that fans could still freely modify it however they wanted, so long as everyone had access to it. A fan hacker by the name of mrox2 was the first in the modding community to publicly state this purist mindset. I hope they released the original after the fixed version as well. If I was them, I would have released original first. That way, they gain more respect and place in the RE world. Gemini, who had secretly joined the team as the lead programmer, responded with, "Given how some reluctantly reacted to that, and how they would consider it yet another mod, if I were them, I'd release the modded edition first, let the people appreciate their work, and only then distribute the vanilla proto, just to make them realize all the hard work they are supposed to be doing." And then there was another Facebook leak just days later, this time tied to the name B Zork. The post included game screenshots and work in progress pics with custom tools being used. The screenshots also had the first clear look at female zombies that were first seen in early preview trailers. This caused many people to be excited, as this was further proof that the game was being worked on. But again, others were not as excited. Martin Biohazard noticed that the changes being implemented were more than he expected. This I do not like. They changed the 1.5 weapons in the inventory to RE2 and RE3 icons. Gemini had a quick response for him. Why would they leave placeholders is beyond me. I'm more than glad to accept this choice of changing the prototype icons, with others coming from final builds of later titles. At least we won't have to play with something that looks like a pile of vomit. As the source saw all of this going down, he got cold feet, and the team tried reassuring him again. It was hard to, as their secret was now out there. They can no longer work in private. The community was talking about this rumor where the elites bought a copy of the game and that they were keeping it from them, but still handing out copies to their friends. Then, in early September, one of the elites secretly met with the source to give him the honest truth of what was going on. He told him about how the leaks were getting out of control, how the team would hand out copies to friends, and how one of the biggest leakers was from the highest ranks within the team itself. This was enough to scare away the source for good, immediately cutting off all communication with the team. Its members would try contacting him over the next few months, but they would receive no response. On top of that, the source would also tell his own connections about how badly managed Team IGAS was and urged them to not do business, to stay away from them. The team was essentially now blacklisted from the video game collector market as a whole. This was a major blow, and they realized that they really needed to get their house in order, especially because now they don't have the privilege of working in private. Team members were shuffled around and new members were brought in. Carnivol had already recruited Gemini, an outsider to the 1.5 community, but a very talented fan hacker and PlayStation programmer whose work speaks for itself. However, according to Richard Mandel, his skills came with an ego, as he would routinely talk down to others and berate those that he considered beneath them. It was hard to earn his respect in this field. Alzair and the team could look past this, as his skills were crucial to rebuilding 1.5. He'd also start using an alias, just like Carnivol, to hide his identity whenever the team needed him to publicly talk about the tech side of things. D. Birkin was the name. Mark Grass would also be recruited. Even though she was in the modding community, she was more independent than the rest of that scene and could be trusted due to the mutual benefits between her and the group, as she would have access to the team's builds and would even be allowed to keep one. Her work would also get the respect of Gemini himself. As for him, he learned more and more about the game over time, but he realized that it was going to take a lot more work than what they originally thought. The team pitched this project to him as a repair job, but due to his technical knowledge, he quickly learned that this would not be so simple. He would also indicate how unhappy he was with the game itself, as so many of the placeholders and assets weren't to his liking. He even programmed parts from scratch as opposed to importing them from other Resident Evil games. Once Gemini got comfortable with the inner workings, that's when he pushed his own ideas on how to improve it. This was supported by Carnivol, but other members of the team weren't as enthusiastic. This caused a divide that mirrored the sentiments of the community. One side wanted the game to be as close to the original vision as possible. The other side, Gemini's side, wanted to take artistic liberties to make the game better. This would result in the more purist members of the team leaving the project. By the end of 2012, the team now consisted of 4 main members: Carnivol, Gemini, Mark Grass, and Sonic Blue. In order to regain control of project security and prevent further leaks, they cracked down on friendship copies being distributed and removed a bunch of people that aided them from the outside. Going forward, if someone was brought in to help on something, the team would give them an older development build that wouldn't have been as harmful to the project if it got leaked. Gemini also had purposely put in bugs for testing purposes that lessened the value of a leak from this build. It was also linked to the rare PSX v1.14 PS PC emulator because it was saved in the emulator's special image format. This made it incompatible with other systems, much less be able to be burned onto a CD. Something else the team would start doing is gathering allies and applying pressure to not only its critics, but any competitors on the Horror is Alive and modding forums. They would contact trusted fan modders that supported the team's project to get into the good graces of those who were making their own fan projects. This was done at first to see if they had any assets that should have been exclusive to the team. They had to make sure no one was leaking anything anymore. Eventually, at least one of the RE123 moderators was flipped to their side. This granted this already powerful group another tool to use at their disposal. With this moderator now on their side, they could have them look at both private forums and messages, all without the people involved knowing. This is called spying, and it didn't seem like the team had many qualms about it, considering that Carnivol and other moderators were already doing this on The Horror is Alive. And the reasoning behind this didn't stop at security reasons. If someone had something that would have been useful to the team, they supposedly would just take it for themselves. This happened to DXP, a programmer named the Mortician, Richard Mandel, and Martin Biohazard, amongst others. And in regards to those making their own fan games, the team wouldn't give them any credibility by entertaining their efforts, and sometimes would even talk down to them. That's cute. Look at them trying to attempt what we're doing. However, if those projects would get some traction and get a lot of attention, the team would become very coordinated in attacking them publicly. This kind of behavior, of course, didn't do anything to repair the growing divide in the community. For one, the Mortician was upset that neither he or anyone else on the RE123 modding scene were contacted to be a part of this huge project. They wanted to make sure that the integrity of the game's original vision was respected, and it felt as if they were all being purposefully excluded. On July 29, 2012, Carnivol was on the Horror is Alive forums trying to put together a fundraising drive in case there was ever an opportunity to purchase a copy of 1.5. Obviously to us now, unbeknownst to the community, Carnivol already had a copy of the game and was actively working on it. This drew a lot of ire from the scene, even if they didn't know that Carnivol was involved with the team, as this apparently wasn't the first time he would campaign for a fundraiser. Considering the heightened hostilities in the community around this time, some saw right through him. Black Crow would even publicly accuse him of being one of the elites that actually had a copy of the game and that he was just trolling his own forum. Despite that, Carnivol raised thousands in pledges, but nothing ever came out of that and no money was ever exchanged. Over the next few months, the community was clamoring for answers, and so the team had to put out a statement saying that when the time comes, they will release the unaltered 40% version alongside their own. A promise that, well, we'll find out later. This statement didn't really do much to bring down the tensions between the two camps. At one point, the Horror is Alive staffer RandomWab, to disrupt fighting, posted a screenshot of what looked like Resident Evil 1.5 in his recycle bin. Joke's on all you. I have 1.5, and after seeing this thread, there's only one responsible course of action. This was played off as a joke, and no one took it seriously because the file size was a mere 118 megabytes. However, this was exactly how big the game is. They had a legitimate friend copy. On a more serious side of things, the Mortician was still very much annoyed that no one in the modding scene was asked to be a part of the project. Imagine that. Some guys really have the game. They rip it apart to obtain everything interesting out of it, make comparisons, videos, walkthrough, and images. Of course, all the material is watermarked beyond any recognition with, say, THIA, just an example, all over it. They would rip it all and then maybe release it afterwards, anonymously. Why would they rip all out of it first? Because they want to have exclusive material to show. They want to be the first showing it all, to be worshipped as the 1.5 bringers. Maybe. It happens all the time. Why would they not ask a community like us? Because no one obviously would ask, hey, we have 1.5, can you help with hacking it? Without expecting a major storm occurring. Even though there was all this drama going on, that didn't stop claimers from appearing. The most notable one was what is now referenced to as the anti-scam incident. On September 13, 2012, a new The Horror Is Alive user named Morellis claimed he found a YouTuber named OneGameView that had a copy of the game and was going to send him brand new, unseen pictures. Everyone called his bluff, and it all came to a head when there were reports of a Yahoo user trying to sell the game for $30. As it turned out, both of the YouTube and Yahoo users were the same person. But this, to the team, was a perfect opportunity to not only denounce this latest string of claimers, but also to show off how proficient they are at modifying 1.5. On September 14th, Bzork uploaded a YouTube video of a scene from the game, but it was altered in a way so that the characters were berating the scammers. The community was impressed and thankful because they got to see new footage, and the team earned more confidence from their supporters. Then on August 12th, a member of Project Umbrella, a huge Resident Evil fan site, reached out to the team to give them some info. Clear images of Capcom's original planning scenario for the game. And the person who gave this to them was none other than former White Umbrella staffer Colvin. He had been working with Project Umbrella for a few years now and had been translating that document from Japanese to English. It was a very early version, as Leon was still called Grant Bittman, his original name, and was therefore a big find for the team. It would help them be able to more effectively navigate the game's reconstruction. Aside from this, there were also other developments from the community itself. At this point, a lot of fans on the scene, despite not being part of the elite, had intensive knowledge of the game, so they banded together to try to find and put out more info that would ultimately help both the team and the modding community in trying to recreate 1.5. On August 15th, the Keglunik archives were released. Named after its poster, it contains scans of every single piece of physical 1.5 media out there. Most of it was already known, but it was useful having it all in one place. On August 27th, a researcher named Enigmatism415 released the complete set of the In Flames collection, including the pictures that were initially held back. He would then, inspired by Black Crow's early work, start the process of putting together the most accurate maps for the game. On October 1st, Enigmatism415, Biohazard Star, and Martin Biohazard figured out where the last unknown room of the game was supposed to go. It was in the lab stage, but where exactly was a mystery up until that point. Alzair himself, given that he had access to the game, would confirm that this location was correct. This incited a rivalry with Black Crow, who would go on to update his own maps. It was a win-win for everyone because this meant more accurate resources would be available. Mid-October saw the rise of custom box art and disc labels, with even the team making their own. The most lauded one was by artist Zombie X, because it was made to look like the Japanese case that had been printed to advertise the game in 1997. On December 16th, a community member named Marvin would release the Resident Evil 1.5 soundtrack. This was made by taking all the existing footage of the game and then editing out the dialogue. The modding community, of course, ate this up. Then, on January 11th, 2013, Jerome Chagnon would return to the scene to post a YouTube video of 1.5's final build. It was clear gameplay footage that he got from his new job at Sony's Computer Entertainment of America division. He was in their archives and noticed a Betacam tape with 1.5 footage. He asked if he could share it, and surprisingly, he was allowed to copy and post it online. It's safe to say that for these months, the scene was alive again. There were so many new advancements happening one after another, way too many for me to mention here. The community was riding on these highs, and it would all culminate in the events that happened in late 2012. On October 31st, Bzork posted a Halloween teaser on YouTube, debuting the team logo and showing off what they've been hard at work for. The video included a lot of new stuff that had never been seen before, and it impressed even the most purest members of the community. But what was most exciting of all was that, towards the end, it said to stay tuned for the holiday season. The community went wild, as they speculated that this message meant they'd be able to play the game soon, specifically, as the description says, on Jesus Day, Christmas Day. However, one of the video's tags was TBA 2013. But once all this hype went down a bit, the community was back to its usual us versus them behavior. Team IGAS supporters versus the purist. The frustration of the purist camp came from a desire to preserve the game as it was, bugs and all. This was highlighted in an incident on the 25th of November. A new member of the Assembler Forum's unknown organization put up a listing for a copy of 1.5. This was yet another claimer in the eyes of many. But what was interesting about this one was that it didn't take long for someone to actually go through with buying it. Less than 10 minutes after the post, unknown organization would state that it'd been sold. Moderator, please close this thread. It done. Discussions were allowed to keep going. The buyer, Mr. Sippy, would also comment underneath, saying that they're happy with their purchase and that they're not going to release the copy for the community so that its value can be preserved. Can't touch it now. Bought it. I'm damn happy. I kept refreshing page. I just got lucky. I spent years waiting to buy like that. Thanks. Thing is, I'm a massive fan of it. I prefer Res 1.5 in private. If I give it out in public, then 1.5 is no longer value to itself. This caused a huge discussion on how this type of preservation is pointless if the general public can't enjoy something as well. If something like a game is preserved privately, then it might as well not exist. The community really let their frustrations out in this forum thread. Mr. Sippy would also get a ton of DMs trying to contact him, and also a lot of alleged threats, forcing him off the site. The validity of the sale was always called into question from the start. What they were able to figure out is that both unknown organization and Mr. Sippy had the same IP address. The sale was faked. Just another person that wanted to rile them up. So then, December finally comes around. On the second day, Bzork uploads the first of 4 Advent videos leading up to the holiday season. This video had a scrapped side character named Roy in the police department and would end with a jump scare of sorts. A picture of Leon as the sound of a woman screaming played. This was a joke video, but people still appreciated this look into what the team had made. December 19th was the date of the second video where development time-lapse is shown, along with the reveal of the first ever footage of the inside of the B2 boiler room. December 16th, the third video with the B1 kennels alongside the B1 basement main hallway. Bzork also put out this comment underneath. Hoping we finally get to play the game on Xmas, even if it's just the unfinished version? So sorry for too many waits. Still look forward to Advent 4 and Christmas news. Expect big surprise. I couldn't find this exact comment here, meaning it was likely deleted. Probably because this caused insane hype amongst the community, reinforcing their idea that they would get the game on Christmas Day. Then on December 23rd, the fourth and final video was uploaded, where Leon walks in and points his gun at the viewer, followed by the words, "Be patient." The community erupted. However, the division instilled within it still reared its ugly head. Upset over how excited everyone else was about this version potentially being released, the purists were trying to talk down to everyone, saying stuff like how they should be focusing on their friends and families on Christmas instead of being glued to their screens for this game. Naturally, this type of talk incited a huge flame war that went into the following day, Christmas Eve. So finally, it's here. Christmas Day has arrived. The community kept an eye on Bzork's channel in anticipation for the news. And then Much to people's disappointment, it wasn't ready. It was also revealed that the surprise was going to be a making of video, not the game they've been working on. In a Q&A held on The Horror is Alive, Bzork also affirmed that their original game will only be released after the team's version, and that this was for the best. New Year's Eve came around, and that's when Bzork uploaded the first making of RE 1.5 commentary video that depicted the team's translation process. This whole thing wasn't what the community expected, and while the diehard supporters appreciated this update, there was still a good chunk of the fanbase whose hopes in the team were starting to dwindle. They didn't even know it at the time, but that hope would have been drastically lowered if they could have seen the full picture. Behind the scenes, the team and the elites were constantly tested. That summer of 2012, there were those that weren't happy with the direction that the game was headed towards. They also didn't like how Carnivol and Gemini would interact with the community under their aliases. Additionally, the team, even after the whole ordeal with the source, was not able to stop leaks. There were people from within that were selling copies of the game. The first person to do this was actually the one who paid the most to purchase it from the curator. He sold copies to 2 other people for around $2,000 each, as he was trying to get some money back from this investment. But there were supposedly other members who were still giving out or selling copies to other prominent Resident Evil fansite staff members, to the point that a dozen or so had made it out. There were also the elites who weren't happy with Gemini's version for the game, so they would contact members in the lower ranks of the community to give them data from the game. Not sell, give, in the hopes that it would be able to help their own 1.5 projects, so that these other versions can be as close to the original as possible. However, once the team noticed these projects contained their secret data, they cracked down on them. They'd look into their messages, copy any files on their account for closer examination, and even take a look at IP addresses to find out who the leaker was. All of this was unacceptable, and the highest ranked team members dealt with these leakers themselves. It's unknown how they did so, but they were able to seemingly stop any further issues from these dissenting members after talking with them. We already discussed how excited the community was when Bzork dropped the Halloween teaser video, but let's now take a look at a different side that played out. On that day, assembler user G-Man Willis pointed out certain things about the trailer, indicating that he had insider knowledge on both the team and their efforts to restore the game. He tells in detail about how broken the 40% version actually is, and how the team is changing so much of it in their attempts to fix it. On top of that, he also claimed that the release date was originally going to be Halloween, but an important team member went missing, causing the team to find a replacement. Once the team saw this, they were enraged because what he said was mostly right, and that meant that there are still leaks happening. They, at this point, had an idea of who this potential leaker might be, but before they could take care of them, they had to take care of G-Man Willis. Carnivol would respond with, yes, exactly what the world needed. Another one who'd like some attention by claiming to know something about something where the little official media have at least a couple of times mentioned that anything posted outside of said channel is just people full of lies and false claims. What then ensued was a 2-day back and forth insult war, where Carnivol would even bring out his alternate account, Bzork, to directly call out G-Man Willis for lying. The goal here was to publicly discredit and shame G-Man Willis. Let him cause a scene here so that if he ever did say anything else that was an actual leak, then no one would believe him. He kept saying that he knew more about the team and the project, but the general consensus was against him at the time, as people there sided with Bzork and the team. Let THIA have their fun. They're just proving to everyone else what an unstable, immature community they are. I was just passing on what I heard to further help the community understand, and this is what happens. SMH. He would also share a message he got from the man who owns the actual original 1.5 disc. The thing is, it's just getting way too out of hand, and there was a reason the guys were trying to run damage control and discredit you. There is more at stake beyond the project itself. If you care about the community, it would probably be better to swallow your pride and just not respond to anything. You know you got the legit info, so try not to worry about what the others say. Sorry it came down to all this. I know it could be tough to not want to give fans more info about things. Hell, it's why I leaked info to people like you, because it's hard to contain that kind of knowledge. This plea would just fall on deaf ears, as G-Man Willis continued to make noise. This incident was also the first time that Gemini would use the D. Birkin account. I can see this guy who has the info, igniting an enormous flame, posting trollish messages, and completely unrelated pictures. I wonder why the moderators still haven't done a thing, not even posting warning messages. Not long after, the moderators would then ban G-Man Willis for a week. Then, on the 25th of November, during the Mr. Sippy incident, he tried to get Mr. Sippy to release the game. After he failed at doing so, G-Man Willis then claimed that he had all 3 builds of RE 1.5. Early build, 40% build, final build. No one believed him, but it was enough to worry the team. His earlier leaks were right. What if he somehow does have these builds when they only had 1? So they continued to publicly attack him one last time, but they were far from done with him. An assembler member named Dice Games, using another account under the name Verbal Kintexel, would contact G-Man Willis to make a deal. All 3 of his builds for a rare Twin Snakes beta of Metal Gear Solid. He agreed and they exchanged files, only to rip each other off, as all the files involved weren't as advertised. This file exchange, however, let another member, Robert Kendo, hack into G-Man Willis's private FTP server to access his supposed 3 builds. They were all copies of Biohazard 2 Beta 2. On January 22nd, 2013, Robert Kendo publicly exposed him on the assembler forums, causing G-Man Willis to be permanently banned from the site. It's important to note here that these intense actions were not one-offs from the team, as they recycled this formula for anyone who they perceived as a threat to their project. It's behavior like this that led the man who tried to talk down G-Man Willis to do what he had done. Remember the last line from this plea? It's why I leaked info to people like you, because it's hard to contain that knowledge. As it turned out, that man was none other than Alzair. He, despite all his efforts over the years, was unhappy. He didn't like the direction 1.5 was being led down. He and the original team just wanted to fix the game, to make it playable, and it all got out of his control. While others left the project, he and a few others that felt the same just put on a brave face and publicly supported the team, while quietly not really believing in them. This was a reason why Alzair and others leaked data to other members of the community. Alzair had lost control. Carnivol and Gemini were now leading the team, and they were leading them through volatile waters as tensions in the community showed no signs of dying down. In the summer of 2012, before the dealings with that one private collector, 2 members of Project Umbrella stepped up and tried to join Team IGAS. They wanted to offer translations as they were both fluent in Japanese. The senior member, to sweeten the deal, offered to contact his Japanese connections that could be used to get more info on 1.5. As tantalizing as these offers may have been, they were both denied entry because the team already had a translator. This was also when there was so much info out there that it didn't seem worth adding more people into the mix considering the leak problems they were having at the time. This upset the candidates, but they were determined to try again in August. The junior member contacted the team to tell them that he had stills of the original game planning document that was shown in an early Capcom documentary and that he was in the middle of translating it. The team was delighted by this, as it would be incredibly useful in their recreation efforts when it came to fleshing out the story. Months later, the team would get the actual planning document from the senior member. As for the junior, since the team felt more secure due to the lack of recent leaks, he was actually recommended to translate the document. He was brought on to help the team, but not directly as a member, but rather an associate. This junior member, by the way, was no stranger to the 1.5 scene, as we've actually already talked about them. This junior member was Colvin. If you remember his history from earlier, then you could already guess that the team would soon regret bringing him on board. As I mentioned, he wasn't super close to the team and was just an associate, so he would also only speak to them through an intermediary. And as a reward for his efforts, Colvin would receive a copy of the game. The info he gave in exchange was considered useful to the project. Colvin, if nothing else, is useful at getting things, so all was forgiven. And then, to finally get all the info Colvin had, the IGAS member sent him the magic door build. The idea was that they wouldn't need Colvin anymore, and that Colvin wouldn't dare go public because IGAS could obliterate him. He had far more to lose than they did. Unfortunately, the person who was dealing with Colvin hadn't been around in the good old days. Around January 17th, 2013, Colvin received a copy of the game, but it wasn't of the real game. It was the security build, and was about a half year behind compared to the team's most current version at that point. After obtaining a copy, I let my ego get the better of me. I sent an email to some of my former coworkers, bragging about it. I think Alzair informed the team because he requested additional information. Project Umbrella PR found out and immediately took disciplinary action, demoting me from co-owner. I started to receive cowardly threats through our mediator, email, and via the 123 forum. Someone had the nerve to say my version was a heavily modified version of Bio 2. In other words, they openly admitted to screwing me. Therefore, I had a hacker look into their claim to make sure I wasn't scammed, and it checked out. The hacker he contacted was Martin Biohazard. Colvin wouldn't take any of the team's resulting private threats lying down, especially once he found out that their original plan for him all along was to just use him and lose him. He would post images and info on RE123 of the game for, as he put it, petty revenge. And as the threats increased, he felt as if he needed to go one step further, and so he put his copy of the game up for sale on eBay. Although, according to Colvin, he never intended to actually make good on this sale. It was just to scare the team, to make them sweat. However, others would point out that Colvin was in debt and had already privately sold off copies of the game before the team found out what he was up to. So he might have been more serious about this listing than he let on. Either way, he pulled it within 24 hours of it being up after meeting with the team's mediator again. Shortly afterwards, he would receive a piracy violation strike from eBay, as someone from the team likely reported his listing. He refused to let them have the last word on this, so on the 5th of February, he posted this statement on RE123. I'm sure someone has it, and that person doesn't like receiving eBay violations after his post has been removed. Message to the restoration team, threaten me again and I'll torrent a copy, along with everything unlocked for non-profit. This game of cat and mouse ends here. Backgrounds have been extracted. Don't reply, don't try to contact me. F off. Attached to this post were a bunch of pictures from his 1.5 copy. Almost immediately, user Gorou Machida, alias for The Horror Is Alive's Enigmatism 415, replied with a message that had all the images from Colvin's eBay listing, seemingly put up as a warning. Both this and Colvin's post were quickly deleted, but it was too late. Other community members had already saved and spread these pictures. They saw that these were legitimate Resident Evil 1.5 screenshots and also shots from the project that the team was working on, causing many to wonder how Colvin ended up with the copy. During all this commotion, an alleged copy of 1.5 was posted on the ISO Hunt website, but when people tried to download it, they would find the link to be dead. Everyone assumed that this was Colvin trying to further engage in this conversation, but he has repeatedly denied this claim. The team at this point didn't know how to deal with Colvin, as they believed sooner or later he would likely just leak the whole thing himself. So on February 16th, Bzork posted a lengthy statement on The Horror Is Alive regarding the team's position concerning this situation. This was the main takeaway. Right now, we're currently looking into our options in regards to our own ownership of any and all our custom assets, other people's supposed illegal replication of them, and this sudden and unapproved commercial use of our non-profit assets and licenses. The statement also took shots at Coleman. Although some might know him as the nut job who's been roaming the Resident Evil community for the better part of what must be close to 2 decades by now, truth of the matter is that he's a sporadic Canadian with a mental disorder whom deliberately fucks people over, steals, lies, deceives, and ultimately just seeks attention for himself, with no concern or interest regarding the public and its interest. This actually caught Coleman by surprise, because both parties were apparently supposed to have some sort of behind-the-scenes agreement facilitated by the mediator at the time. As this saga unfolded, the already divided community took their sides and began arguing with one another. Coleman would also respond to the team with a legal warning of his own. I don't appreciate Bzork's constant bombardment of insults and threats. Very little of what he's saying is true, and I warned him about threatening me last time. I'm going to contact my lawyer and see if I could sue him for fraud and defamation of character. In addition, I'll probably contact my liaison at Capcom to have the project scrapped due to inappropriate behavior. After all, he's interfering with a monetary Capcom-related project. If he doesn't cease and desist, I'll release the game for non-profit. If he decides to use me as a scapegoat to cancel the project due to his own lack of talent, I'll simply release my copy to the fans. I'm calling a truce right now. This was a major declaration from Coleman, one that the team did not take lightly. The whole situation caused them to make an announcement on February 17th, the 16-year anniversary of when the game was officially cancelled by Capcom. Bzork responded to Coleman with another long statement, but there was something substantial at the end. This here is an ISO of our work-in-progress build of the Resident Evil 1.5 Restoration Project. It was a tough decision to make, due to the uncertainty of what lies ahead in terms of releasing this build. But we ultimately decided to make a proper compile of the build Coleman had been shopping around, wrap it up so we could run in normal emulators and on real hardware, and release it to the public, to avoid further misuse and misrepresentation of its content. Happy gaming, and welcome to a world of hopefully less fraud. Now, we back to work on project. Attached was a download for a playable copy of 1.5. This version would be known as the MZD Build. MZD meaning Magic Zombie Door, as it was named after one of the many bugs in the game. This was huge. After so long, a playable copy of 1.5 was out there for anyone to play. It spread amongst the forums, first the 1.5 ones, then Resident Evil, then survival horror, then general gaming, until even mainstream gaming sites covered this release. Most casual Resident Evil fans, despite the bugs, enjoyed it, and the modders tried to dig right into what they could from the game. But of course, there was a group that was still unhappy here. The purists. They were not impressed with this build, as it was simply not the original. It was also modified so that people wouldn't be able to access the directory structure of the game, therefore not letting anyone access the game files. Purists still called for the original 40% build to be released so that everyone can play it and access the files without any restrictions. Of course, these views would clash with those celebrating, and the community once again would intensely argue with one another. Around this time is when Alzair has had enough. He became tired of all this. He had already begun taking steps back from the scene because, for him, the search was over. At that point, he didn't find joy in what he was doing. The constant community division and fighting had worn him down. I was just trying to keep the peace, stop leaks from happening, and salvage what little information we could. But the leaks just kept happening, and it started becoming more stressful than it was fun. It was starting to feel like a job. Of course, Alzair himself was involved in leaks after a point as he grew frustrated with the team's project direction. The team found out about this when Carnivol confronted Alzair, wanting to ask about the sales that had been taking place. That's when Alzair voluntarily confessed to the data dumps. I've been informed by Carnivol that none of the material or anything from the supposed sales came from my end at all. So I confessed for nothing. But I'm still glad I did, and I know it was for the best and got it off my conscience. This would cause Alzair, a top member of the hunt for 1.5, to be kept out of the loop regarding updates and was thus internally deranked. While I am not the sole source of the leaks, I have messed up the most and I'm very regretful, and it's been eating away at me a lot. I was unaware how much was at stake and just made some bad decisions. Been trying to run damage control the best I can. I don't know who to trust anymore. It's just an awful situation. All I want to do at this point is get whatever latest build there is and just bail out of the scene altogether. It feels worse knowing I probably won't get it at this point, unless a public release happened. Alzair had truly reached his lowest point. Fortunately for him, this was all just online stuff. During this time, he was starting a new chapter in his life. He found love and was getting married. This understandably made his involvement in a community that he lost control of, that has changed so much, that has turned extremely volatile, not as important. During the fall of 2012, he was offline from the forums as he moved to the UK. When he returned, he got confronted by Carnivol about the leaks. And then, when this MZD build was released, he thought that this was a good time to leave the scene for good. He started the search at 14, and there he was 15 years later. He dedicated his adult life to all of this, and it was time to let it go. It was a quiet exit, as he only said his farewells to his closest friends. Eventually, the community noticed his absence and mourned him. In that space he left, everyone was reminded of how important he was to the hunt. He was the hunt for a lot of them, and now that he's gone, things will never be the same. Without his presence, there was really no one of that high status trying to maintain the peace. As a consequence, the rift between the community once again widened. The day after the MZD build was released, Martin Biohazard announced that he would no longer update his recreation of the game and would instead focus on trying to fix the bugs of the MZD build. On May 26, 2013, he would release a patch that incited a huge controversy. He was able to get both the shotgun and the magnum pistol to work in more rooms than in the original MZD build. This caught the ire of Gemini, who, as D. Birkin, attacked him, accusing him of getting data from a team leak, as there was no way he would have been able to do this without referencing the original data of the game. IGAS and community lost many important things because of the leak, all because of E popularity. Carnivol as B Zork would follow up these accusations, repeating how these kind of leaks have cost the team deals before. Gemini then doubles down by pointing out how Martin is one of the few people that has a proprietary PlayStation emulator that, according to him, could have only come from a team leak, given that the security build only works on the PSX 1.14 emulator. The team, of course, assumed the leak was Colvin, who did actually send Martin the security copy earlier. Since Martin had this copy, he started working on patching it even before the team publicly released it themselves. However, despite all of these claims, there was no leak of Resident Evil 1.5 data here. The copy he first had was essentially the same one that everyone would get. He didn't have anything from the 40% build that the team was guarding, so there was no way for him to have used that data to patch the game. He was simply that good of a modder, and that angered Gemini and the team, that someone could do something that they couldn't. They had to have cheated somehow. This was at a time when Richard Mandel was active among the lower ranks of the community. He was mostly on the team side of things before, but he didn't like seeing this, as he had become good friends with Martin and knew his character. Mandel understood what he was capable of in a technical sense, and that he wouldn't steal anyone else's code on purpose. He just wanted to fix the game and couldn't tell what code was originally from Capcom and what code was from the team, because he had no point of reference to the original 40% build. This is when Mandel told himself that if he ever had a chance to get the raw build out there, he would do so. As he put it, that day probably marked the start of my long and slow slide away from supporting the team, and toward and eventually firmly into the Purist faction. This was before Mandel knew the extent of what was going on in private. It was just a gut instinct for him to want to help his friend. That month also held the background mask controversy. During the time of Resident Evil 2's development, there was a method used in the industry whenever developers had to hide a character if they were hidden behind something, even partially. This method is called masking. The Mortician knew about this and was the first modder in the community to make a tool that allowed them to do that for their work on 1.5. The team, of course, took notice of this. The Mortician proved he was able to use room background mask data just as well as Gemini could, and so he was attacked by the team and their allies. They absolutely refuted the masking tool he made and would question the authenticity of it. In response, the Mortician would release an image of the tool in use, but still, the team would bash him and call the whole thing a fake, trying to discredit him as nothing more than an attention seeker. What would end up happening, according to the Mortician and DXP, was that a RE123 admin would allow a team sympathizer to change the images that the Mortician had posted and replace them with doctored ones to further accuse him of being a fake. According to DXP, they somehow had access to our private files when we were working on that project. The images had been viewed over 20 times. There was only 7 of us in the team, and those images were set to private. Having the direct link to it was the only way to view them. They began to constantly bully us, stalk us, and put every member down in an attempt to make us give up on our project. To make matters worse, they were actually monitoring private message traffic, and I mean all of it, just to see who had information about 1.5. The spying he mentions here at the end of the quote was a result of a former major team leak. For over the past 6 months on the RE123 site, someone had been in contact with a rogue elite member who was willing to hand over 1.5 data. They were tired of how the project was going, along with being frustrated over the public behavior of the 2 fake aliases of the team leads. As a result, they contacted a modder and told them that he could share these assets if the modder were to use them for a recreation project. The modder agreed and got the complete background set for 1.5. This and the following events happened without the team's RE123 mole getting wind of it. The modder then contacted a small team of trusted senior modders. They got more and more data over the coming weeks until contact with the leaker stopped. They got all but one file, the executable. Still, such a massive amount of info was now at their disposal. When the Colvin fiasco caused the team to release their MZD build, it was a perfect opportunity for the modders. They could now more openly use this build as cover for their work. Still not forgetting how the team secluded them, they wanted to prove themselves to the community, and they had an advantage with all this original data. Team 96 would form, of which the Mortician was a member. These efforts, of course, got the attention of Team IGAS. They sent out their RE123 mole to gather any information they could from them. They got updates and saw the downloads of what was being shared in both the restricted parts of the site and personal messages. Team 96, however, eventually figured out what was happening and moved their conversations off of the site, away from these prying eyes. On the public side of things, Team IGAS would ridicule and attack these modders repeatedly for the rest of the year, as they saw them as a threat. They didn't want competition. They didn't want anyone else to mess with their vision for the game. And as we've seen time and time again, the actions of prominent members trickle down to the masses. By spring, there was a full-on war in the community as purists defended this new team, repeatedly clashing with the other side. Eventually, Team 96 would take a page out of Team IGAS's book and make a new account, Rion Z Canada, that served as the figurehead for the modders. On May 28th, on RE123, the account posted a bunch of pictures from the 40% build alongside a statement criticizing Team IGAS. That team isn't saying even half of the truth. They pretty much lie about a lot of things. Seems like they want to get fame by claiming shit. That was there right from the start. They probably have hidden the files in their leaked version to make it impossible for you to see what was original and what was their content. I'm not kidding, it will happen soon enough. They would then post again with more pictures attached. The team's response was initially to not give it any attention, That is, until people started talking about it on the Horror is Alive forum. Carnivol and Gemini, as D. Birkin, would respond by once again reiterating how this kind of stuff hurts the team's goals. How leaks hurt their chances at getting other builds from collectors, since they'd be less likely to trust the team. This is ironic, considering that their earlier intentional leaks were a reason why the collector, known as the Source, got scared off. The Bezork account also commented, mentioning that the team had the original disc. They were the ones that negotiated to get it, and therefore they have more validity. However, whether or not they had the original disc didn't matter if there were copies of it going around. Plus, that wasn't even true. The original disc from the Curator belonged to Alzair. Edponge would then make a comment, pointing out a pattern he's noticed. I myself was in contact with a source who had RE 1.5. He sent me a number of screenshots back then of him playing the game on his TV, but the fucker was just a tease and never gave me a copy. To this day, I'm convinced those who own it are using it as a penis size comparison, and nothing more. The guy I knew was a with ears, as was Curator. I think I see a pattern. Tensions with the rest of the modding community were still high. DXP and the Mortician would continue to denounce the team's efforts, nicknaming it the Bastard Build, and still calling for the original prototype to be released. Gemini at that point had already written off them and the modding scene. Oh my, that place is getting more and more hilarious as time passes by. Most of the discussion there is, I'm a complete computer science illiterate, but I need to post some technical crap totally made up, flame about it, and then simply pretend it's not happening. Then, on May 31st, ReonZ Canada returned with a statement hinting at an upcoming release. This excited so many purists. Finally, there was someone stepping up to Team IGAS. At last, the community would once and for all be able to play the clean version of this elusive game. But when the day came around, nothing ended up happening. Not even an explanation post from ReonZ Canada. The crowd, seemingly not learning from the past, had their hopes up and were once again disappointed. Among the cries calling out this publicity stunt, there were those that defended it, such as Zombie X, who seemed to have had enough with that side of the community. Been duped? He never promised it would be released today, only that he was aiming for a Sunday release. Could happen in life and stuff can get delayed. And if he were to release it, so what, I say? The work in progress is more stable and complete anyways. There won't be that many differences. He would later on add that, I honestly didn't expect a release either. I figured he was just blowing smoke. The purist mentality here is quite funny. Get the MZD build, cry it's not the vanilla build, call what the team is doing, spit on their skills left and right. Whiners don't deserve shit. The community does not even deserve the build. Choke on it. Despite this resounding statement condemning the calls for a raw build, he would post this comment, noticing something that would eventually change the scene forever. Did you guys see the auction on eBay for a test PS2, some PS2 betas, and the vanilla build of 1.5? On May 27th, 2013, an eBay listing was posted by Bedbug111 that supposedly contained the plain vanilla build. This term, PvB, by the way, was actually coined by Richard Mandel, and its use is hated by Gemini. He would even go off on those that used the name around him, as it reminded him of Mandel. He prefers the term raw build. Ironic, as the term came from how Gemini would earlier describe the build as vanilla. He didn't like it, perhaps because it was named exactly how the team named the MZD build. He at one point stated that he'd rather hurl babies into the sun than hear those 3 letters again. But anyway, word of this auction spread, and by the time the community spotted it, the bidding was at $610. Many, despite their enthusiasm for this build to be released, fairly assumed it was yet another fake. Carnivol would agree with this sentiment as well, citing the type of disc seen in the pictures as that disc would have been used in the 90s. It would have been too expensive for stuff like demos. Richard Mandel also thought it was fake at first, and even reported the listing as fraudulent to eBay, but it was never pulled. So we took a second look and examined it closely. Really closely. Thanks to his previous experience in the game industry, he was able to notice that the Japanese writing on the disc reminded him of the beta discs he used to see before they were released to the West in the early 2000s. He knew it wasn't an original disc, but whoever wrote on it did so in a manner that was very close to how a game developer would. So he looked further into it and was going through the screenshots, one after another, until he saw something. Something he's never seen before. And he made sure to check. It wasn't ever seen in footage or screenshots, fan posts, or press published images. Elsa and Leon, together inside the engine of the train near the game's end. It didn't look fake at all. He even used software to make sure that the photo wasn't edited. The results came back negative. Could it be? He couldn't believe it. Is this actually happening? The signs pointed to this being an actual copy of the 40% build. He wasn't rich by any means, but he was fortunate enough to live comfortably and afford himself the occasional expensive treat. A treat such as this. So he contacted his friend, who was a regular eBay user, and let him know about this disc, how important it was, and that he wanted him to bid on it for him. His friend was on board, and when he asked Mandel how high he was willing to go, Mandel just smiled and said, "Until you win it." On the last day of the auction, June 4th, the bidding started to intensify as all the bidders had waited until the end to make their move. The community, curious, watched it all go down. And then the bidding stopped. Everything was sold for a final price of $2,429.93. The winner was Mandel. He had done it. Mandel himself first arrived on the Resident Evil scene in late 2008, where he would make the Resident Evil TV series, RETV, stitching together footage from the games released at the time and putting them into a cohesive story for viewers to follow. A member of the team was adamant about making an episode around 1.5. This was Mandel's first introduction to the game. However, there wasn't enough out there to make it a whole episode. Years later, there were higher quality videos out there, so Mandel decided to remaster the RETV videos with that footage. As he was doing this, he was still hung up on that 1.5 video idea that was mentioned so long ago. And that's when Martin Biohazard released the first playable version of the game. Mandel contacted him and got permission to use the game's footage for that RETV episode. This is how Mandel got sucked into this side of the community. Lurking at first, but soon becoming so interested in what everyone was talking about that he just had to get involved. And now, he had gone so much further ahead than most of the community. 4 days after the auction, a package arrived at his home, but he was unfortunately away at work, so it was returned to the mailing office. It wasn't until that following Monday, June 10th, that he could pick it up after work. Once home, he opened the box, and there it was on top of the rest of the hardware. He went straight for it, ignoring the rest of the package, as the rest of the contents would remain untouched for 2 days. He opened the bubble wrap and was determined to get this disc out. Mandel, holding it, still in disbelief, with shaking hands, took it to his computer and inserted it. He opened up EPSXE, a PlayStation emulator, and the screen went black, blinked, and then finally. The original PVB boot screen. Overcome with emotion, he yelled out in excitement and leapt and cheered around the room like a boy on Christmas morning, scaring off his cat in the process. Mandel then went through the game and cross-referenced it from the known data to make sure that it's all there as it should be, to make sure that it's legitimate, and it was. I had it. By God, I had it. This was the long sought after, raw, and untouched original 40% vanilla build of Resident Evil 1.5. Now that I had it, I found myself in the same situation as Alzair and his friends had been back in November of 2011. What was I going to do with it? The first people he told were his closest trusted The Horror is Alive friends, from whom he also sought advice. You see, at the time, Mandel was still a believer in the work of the team, and didn't want that effort to be jeopardized. He bought that disc for both Martin and to prevent a huge leak. According to the notes he had written back then, so what am I gonna do with it? Get it to the people who could do the most with it, and then sit on it, period. No free posting for the ROM's leeches. I won't be the one to ruin the team's efforts. I'll let somebody else take the onus for that. And he did exactly this. He wanted to contact someone from the team. His first pick was Alzair, but he was already gone with no way of finding him. So, wanting more advice, he put together a list of the community elites and randomly picked one and sent them a message. The name he picked was Carnivol. He sent him a long message explaining the whole situation, his reason for bidding on the auction, and how he has no intention of releasing the game. By Mandel's own admission, he acknowledges that this was a severely naive thing to do, as he didn't have all the info he now has. Carnivol was very surprised, as it was not public knowledge that he was on the team. That's the whole point of the Bezork account. He initially thought some other team member sold him out, but Mandel would tell him that he was randomly chosen out of a list of elites. They discussed what happened and answered each other's questions, with Carnivol even revealing some private info about the auction that the curator got his disc from. And at the end, Carnivol agreed that Mandel's copy should remain a secret. The next person Mandel contacted was Martin Biohazard, who was dumbfounded and overcome with joy about this purchase. Mandel was going to give Martin a copy for free, but Martin instead offered an exchange for his unreleased 1.5 PC mod. So they set up the downloads, and they each watched as the exchange happened. In the end, they each received a single copy of the other's files. But there was something wrong. And the logs, instead of reflecting a single download, it said that there were 3. The downloads were seamless for both of them, and they noticed this number when there wouldn't have been time for either one of them to re-download. Something was going on, and that's when it dawned on Mandel. Carnivol. He must have used his admin rights to spy on them, and this is the moment when he realized that Carnivol was on the team. What is this going to mean for him now? He quickly told his other close friends about this so they could communicate off-site going forward. Martin Biohazard would release regular patches of the MZD build, using the 40% copy Mandel gave him as an aid. The team would release developer commentary videos and even tease the release of a 1.5 trial edition. The division in the community would also be, as usual, increasing with every comment. It reached a peak when believers of the team started likening the purists to cultists, once again resulting in fighting on various forums. Mods banned many regulars, and people would leave the scene for good. It intensified to the point that on the RE123 site, the main 1.5 thread was locked down for a few days. Then, in July, Mandel released the first draft of his outline of the 1.5 community story that was met with general positivity. His secret, though, was that he had a copy of the PVB, and that was one of his biggest sources. As his research went on, he talked to multiple people for his writings and asked around, trying to get the scoop on behind the scenes stuff, one of whom even gave him false information on purpose to sabotage his work. This'll come back later. Then, on August 13th, Mandel was promoted at his job, which caused him to spend more overtime at work, impacting his free time. So he decided that what he wanted to focus on was bringing his writings up to date. He updated his draft and posted it, and at the end, he included 2 videos of the PVB, as he would also reveal that it was he who won that auction in June. That was my second mistake. Like Alzair and others before me in their turn, I was tired of sitting on the news. I was also upset at having my trust betrayed by Carnivol and presumably the team. Now, he knew what was going to happen once he put this information out there. He expected to get mobbed, but not to this extent. So many people begging for copies. Alongside that horde were DMs from elites congratulating him. Other prominent figures from both the purist and modding sides also invited him to join their causes. As for the team, they were somewhat quiet during this. Too quiet. On September 3rd, D. Birkin announced that the trial edition that was going to replace the MZD build was not releasing in September. The speculation was incorrect, and the team needs more time as they don't even know when it'll be ready. He would also say that 1/3 of the original code was now either repaired or replaced. There was also new code to make the game's original features functional and to add additional features. As you can imagine, this was news that riled up the purist camp. On September 8th, D. Birkin announced that they had replaced all of the game's old PvP maps with new ones, inspired by Resident Evil 2. Of course, purists were shocked. 1.5 map screen was better. It is only sprites and default background. We do not add options for all because of sentimental favorites. If you want prototype look, play MZD Build. It was once again obvious that there was no negotiating here. The game was going to be what the team wanted it to be. This resulted in 4 days of fighting in the community, as many were upset the team was making more and more changes that weren't related to coding or functionality. They were changing things that made 1.5 what it was, and without giving fans an option to opt out. Their way was the only way. This was another factor that caused Mandel to change his mind on the team, as from that point forward, he would wholeheartedly switch to becoming a purist. The community was too divided to ever be the same. The purists would never accept whatever the team made, and the team and their supporters wanted nothing more for the purists to just shut up and or leave. That included Mandel as well. Because of his writings and research, he'd ask around and people were telling him very accurate things. So in an effort to discredit him, the team put him next on their hit list. Gemini, as D. Birkin, during an update on the work progress, would send a slight towards Mandel's writings. Referencing Mandel's retelling of the Facebook leaks, D. Birkin said, "If we take Facebook, men with other builds can disappear after picture leaks. If that was a true story. I like funny stories fans create to keep public busy." 4 days later, Mandel would respond and called the team's version an ersatz build. Before certain feathers get too ruffled, let me clarify something. I'm using ersatz in the original German sense of the word, not the English. In English, it's usually taken as a product that is always inferior to the original. In German, it's a product we hope is as good as or even superior to what was originally planned. That's why I chose the word. Sound familiar? He would get massive praise from the purist camps for this statement, causing even more ire from the team towards him. The next day, Mandel defended Ed Ponge's reposting of a Church of the Raw build image that depicted the purist as cultists. It was deleted by Carnivol, causing Mandel to write that, whether it's the Church of the Raw build or Cult of the Teams build, Bastard build, Zealot, or Hardcore IGAS, to quote someone else, or somewhere in between, we're all one big happy dysfunctional family here in 1.5 land. You could always PM me your artwork at if no one else wants to see it. I still think it's hilarious. When Mandel posted this, he took a second look to proofread it and was surprised to see that Carnivol had used his admin rights to change Mandel's message. After the original text, Carnivol had included this statement, repeating it 7 times. "Breaking news, I'm an idiot, and I totally own 80% builds, vanilla and chocolate flavored 40%, and rare, medium, and well done. What the fuck am I even talking about? Seems like I forgot to read." End of news. Mandel would delete this out of his comment and call out the admins for trying to censor him and others. This was all the beginning of a big back and forth argument in the community over what the team's builds should be called. Many purists agreed with Mandel's appointed term, the ersatz build. This caused Gemini, as D. Birkin, to get back into the conversation, posting a German sentence translating to, "While we're happy that folks want to give our effort a name, we would prefer to name it ourselves." He would then, under his Gemini account, agree with himself that there was no need for any other names. He would even say that he could see the team's trial edition becoming the demo build, with the complete team game being the final build. At this point, the purists had figured out that D. Birkin was Gemini, so this was a whole spectacle to see. Purists were taken aback by the audacity. and Mandel would get the last say in the matter with his statement. Sorry, but final build is already taken by the real thing, and people have already been using demo build for both the 40% and the MZD build for quite some time. Nice try, no cigar. The team, still looking to retaliate against Mandel, jumped on the opportunity on September 21st. They and their supporters meticulously picked apart Mandel's update to the brief history of 1.5, which claimed that the collector the team missed out on trying to make a deal with, the source, had access to several other builds of the game. Mandel had written that this collector had 7 lost builds, but this was in fact not true, causing him to make a partial retractment a few days later, after he went through his sources to figure out where the misinformation had come from. For the team, this was just more ammunition to use against him, to discredit him if they needed to later on. Remember that one of the reasons he bought the copy of the game in the first place was so that it would be in responsible hands, where it wouldn't be leaked, and thus put the team's project in jeopardy. And now, they're making fun of him and repeatedly trying to tear him down. Given this recent behavior, Mandel no longer felt obligated to help them in any way, shape, or form. They, without seeing how much of a danger he could be to them, had poked and poked and poked, pushing him to the edge. He has had enough, and he was now ready to use his copy of the PvP to his advantage. After discussing the matter with his closest contacts, Mandel was determined to release the PvP on Halloween, or maybe even as far as November 6th, the anniversary of the disc's burn date. He wanted either of these dates for further impact. This process started on September 23rd. Mandel had worked overtime at his job and arrived home that morning. Despite how tired he was set to do what he wanted to when he got home. He went on RE123 and messaged 5 of the team's harshest critics. Among them were DXP and Zombie X. In his messages, he told them that he was giving them an ISO image of his PvP copy so that they could better argue against the team's statements on what exactly they're changing in the game. This would hopefully make the team freak out as they would scramble to figure out how they were able to call them out. Given his previous experience with Carnivol, he was more cautious this time. The download was hosted offsite on his Mediafire account. Once he and the recipients made sure that the files were transferred and they confirmed that they were the only ones getting the file, Mandel would delete it from his account. To be extra sure, it would also be erased from his trash bin, therefore completely deleting the ISO image online. As an extra precaution, he also made sure the link he sent them no longer worked. The process was secure and it had been completed. Content and looking forward to the team's reactions to what those 5 would do with all that info, Mandel went to bed and slept most of the day. Unfortunately, his activity that morning was spotted by members of both sides of the community. There was more going on in the purist camp that he didn't know about. The spying was coming from both sides. Had he known this info, he would have just waited to share the PvP on Halloween. His Mediafire account would be hacked. And even worse, somehow, the PvP ISO image was back on his account. And worse still, the download link he shared works again. Almost 99% of the PvP data was in the hands of modders, one of them being the Mortician. He was also at his wit's end with the team and wanted to release the data he had already. He and fellow RE123 admin, Evil Marshy, were in agreement and were in the middle of deciding on a date to release the data they had. And on that morning, 3 of the team's biggest critics informed the Mortician of what Mandel had sent. When he and Evil Marshy checked out the link, it was live. This was even better than releasing the 99% of data they had. They could just share this for anyone to download. They assumed that Mandel wanted this to be public because he created that link and because he had included a message alongside the ISO image. No team shit, pure 40% raw build. This, as you now know, was not the case. Mandel's original intentions were for the purists to get a big advantage over the team so that they, for once, could really put them in their place. After which, Mandel would release the PvP. He never imagined what would happen next. On The Horror is Alive at 4:35 p.m., Joshua Kane, one of the 5 members that Mandel contacted, made this post alongside a screenshot. "Oh, happy day, I finally play 1.5. I love the atmosphere, but it seems like it feels the same the whole time, no matter where you are at. Makes sense they changed everything but the lab." 11 minutes later, Zombie X, who also received a copy from Mandel, posted that, "Though I have agreed to not release it, others might. That is, if others do have it. As of now, only I and a few others might have it." This got people talking. Ed Ponge would say that it seems to be spreading pretty fast, even if there is no public download link. Zombie X would respond with, "Seems so. There's a few more than me who have it." Then, at 5:32 p.m., Evil Marshy made this revolutionary post. "Everyone has it anyway. We get nothing because we give nothing. Agreements, I didn't agree to anything. Yeah, like I'll agree with someone I don't even know who probably got it through illegal means in the first place. If he got it from someone else, then he's a hypocrite. Some dude paid for this. It's worth nothing. People already have it. By holding off these releases, we are only yearning for it and have 1,000+ page threads about it. Anyway, why am I trying to give an explanation? It should have been leaked over a year ago, and it would have if I had my hands on it. If it wasn't me to do it, we'd waste more time and someone else would do it anyway. Anyway, enjoy and share." And included in this post was Mandel's private link for anyone to click on. Carnivol saw this and the anti-team message inside and was outraged. He deleted the link from the post, but Marshy once again put it up, only for Carnivol to take it down a second time. It was easy for everyone to guess that Mandel was the source of the leak, as he was the only one to previously publicly state that he owned the PvP. Word of this deleted link went around, and many wanted it to go back up, but Carnivol refused. Unfortunately for him, it was too late. Despite how badly he wanted to snuff this out and control it, it had spread. The download link was making its way around to other Resident Evil fan sites. All the purists were ecstatic. Even if they haven't gotten their hands on the link yet, they knew they'd be getting it soon. They knew that this was it. When the link was posted on resident.evil.de, Assembler user Joseph Campbell would post it on the Assembler forums, and everyone there was downloading it. "This is what I really wanted. Thanks. I've just been playing it on my phone emulator, and it hasn't crashed at all. All the rooms seem to be linked. The weapons work, cutscenes work, and there are less bugs than the Magic Zombie Door release. And obviously, it doesn't have those bloody Claire Redfield missing posters. This is what the fans wanted." All of this excitement was happening when Mandel was sleeping. When he finally woke up at 6:55 p.m., he checked out the Horror is Alive forums to see what he assumed would be chaos. And he did, in fact, see chaos. But he only stayed on long enough to get a glimpse of it, not looking into the details and really seeing why there was so much going on. He logged off and went to work, clueless to what was put in motion. D. Birkin was on the scene in full damage control, trying to once again explain that leaks, such as this one, only hurt the project since it means collectors would be less willing to share data from their builds with them. Leaks like these have made them lose contact with collectors. A reminder that the team had lost contact because of leaks coming from within the team itself, that he also was apparently involved in. He got some pretty big pushback, as many members of the community weren't buying this story anymore, as the team has always been secretive of the exact details of how and why they lost contact with the source. But back to the leak itself. As many wondered what exactly happened, Evil Marshy made a clarifying post on RE123 at 12:56 a.m. the next day, explaining that he received the build from Mortician a few hours ago. Then I simply asked for his permission to leak it. I wasn't going to allow people to postpone the inevitable. It was going to be leaked, and we all know it. If it's not in circulation by the morning, I'm just going to post it wherever. I simply want everyone to have it. That's it. Say what you will about the situation, but a person should not be censored just because a small knit group of people don't like the words a person says. I only did what I know is the right thing to do. So yeah, that's my view on things. It was during the ensuing discussion that things were muddied even more because Zombie X would state that he promised their source, Mandel, that they wouldn't leak the build. The mortician would then make a very long reply, further explaining the situation, but the important parts were that, first, yes, he, Evil Marshy, got it from me, so that's out, and I must admit that I've been sitting on a copy of it for quite some time now. In the last few months, there were several persons I've met that had it. Some provided only selected files, and some the full build in the end. Up to today, I was holding back this thing, because I really had persons that I knew involved, which required me to make a promise and agreements, etc. I kept those, because they meant something to me. Today, this changed. I got 3 different PMs all offering me to share the build. The way I was approached was not like, take it if you sign here and promise not to. It was rather like someone was throwing stuff out of a window. I realized that it would be a couple hours with guys acting like this until the build will get public. Like Evil Marshy, I don't believe in the stupid claim that it would lead to an end of IGAS's project. It's more like people desperately searching for a justification to further just hoard the thing for them. To the poor guy who spent a lot of cash for it, sorry dude, but it's your fault in the end. Don't take this as ungrateful, but you can't complain about people sharing stuff that you started to share like warm bread in the end. And it really was spread so much today that you could say it was done on purpose. Someone wanted it to happen. Hence why there also is that little offensive named text file in the RAR. Also, the MediaFire link for it is still online. It would be time to pull the plug if someone would have a problem with the spreading. The discussions from this continued as Mandel got home from work at 8:15 a.m. He was so tired that he went straight to bed without checking any of the forums. Over on The Horror Is Alive, Carnivol was still refusing to allow the links to be posted, at least until the anti-team message was removed. However, people were starting to figure out where to find the link. In the afternoon, Zombie X would post download links that had the message removed, so Carnivol allowed those to stay up. As more and more purists played it, they felt validated because it actually wasn't as broken as the team made it out to be. Even though they knew what to expect from the MZD build, they still rejoiced for the most part because here it was, the true, clean, raw build that they had so desperately wanted to get their hands on, that they wanted to be out there publicly for preservation's sake. When Mandel woke up, it was mid-afternoon, and since it was his weekend, he had time to finally check online. He expected chaos, but not like this. He was shocked to see just how much stuff had spun out of control from him. He immediately checked his MediaFire account, and sure enough, there it was, the ISO image. He once again removed the file and deleted it from his recycle bin. By his own admission, his password security wasn't the greatest, as he used the same password on RE123 as he did on MediaFire. So that's likely how the account was compromised. But at that point, it was done and out of his hands. One half of the community celebrated him. The other detested him. He thought they had grown and learned from past events. But as he saw, he was wrong. That's what this situation proved to him. The leak spread and they reacted intensely, still arguing with one another. Despite the circumstances not being how we wanted them to be, 1.5 was finally out there. There was nothing else he could do but celebrate with some Jack Daniels and Captain Morgan. I'm sure that no one on that Capcom development team could have ever imagined what would come out of their work being cancelled. That there would be so many people clawing at the chance to experience it. And that version wasn't even the most complete one. There's still another version out there, the final build, that still holds valuable information about what the game would have been. But after this point, the scene seems to have dwindled tremendously. They finally got something, and it took so long and cost them so much. To many, there must have not been much point in holding out, hoping to do it all over again for a different version of it. Once the dust had settled from this final leak, the Mortician and Evil Marshy both asked to be unmodded, stripped of their administrative roles, as penance for how things went down. Although Mandel didn't really hold anything against them. Despite the hype dissipating and the crowd not being as big, that didn't stop Martin Biohazard and many others from working together to release the biggest patch of the MZD build on June 3rd, 2018. He would also stay committed to it, working on Resident Evil mods as recent as 2025. And he's not alone, as his work has inspired others to try their hand at modding the game. Darksavior DXB is in the same boat, still modding these early Resident Evil games as of late. As for the team, in 2015, in an effort to facilitate the production, they would join forces with the development team, Loboto 3. Together, they would release a demo that included a brand new minigame, Battle Coliseum, where the player would fight their way through multiple courses of enemies as fast as they could. As big of an update this was, this would be among the last released from the team. The last time they would post to their Facebook account was on July 11th, 2016. Everyone just assumed that they had stopped development entirely. For all the impact they had on the community, they just petered out. Gemini, much like Martin and DXP, is still working hard on releasing mods. He specifically has had a focus on patching up other Capcom titles, such as Dino Crisis and Dino Crisis 2. Carnivol is now a translator who also owns a video game store. His YouTube channel serves as an archive of various types of media. As for Mandel, he worked with DXP and others to make the Resident Evil 1.5 Revisited project, an archive of models that anyone can use for free. But eventually, he would also leave the scene in 2014 and focus on his own work, becoming an author. And in 2018, he released The Hunt for Resident Evil 1.5. It was controversial, as it even resulted in a threat of a defamation lawsuit from a specific member of the community. What I found interesting in the comment sections of the Eurogamer article that detailed this story was that the clashing between Mandel and Gemini seemingly continued. There's this one comment by ZZZ45 that points out that the article was missing a bunch of crucial information, specifically about Colvin, and at the end, he takes a jab at Mandel and his book, as according to them, it's considered practically fanfic, and the author has been somewhat shady in dealing with the people he interviewed. Mandel would respond directly, accusing the user of being another one of Gemini's accounts. As evidence, he says that he always talks the same no matter the account. In the past, Gemini would often clash with Mandel, so much so that he would not even use his name, and just refer to him as a conspiracy theorist and a fanfiction writer. Mandel also states that Gemini revealed himself as Robert Zork, also known as B. Zork. He did this on his own Facebook page by saying things that were only shared between Mandel and Zork through email. As it turns out, both Carnivol and Gemini had shared that account throughout this saga. Mandel would also post a Mediafire link to the entire email exchange they had, where Robert Zork threatened to sue Mandel. However, it was all just a big bluff. Robert Zork couldn't go through with a lawsuit unless he revealed his own true name. And according to Mandel's attorneys, Zork's claims and accusations were baseless, and his attempt to suppress this work actually put Mandel in a legitimately solid spot to sue him instead. This is why Zork's threat never went anywhere, and he would subsequently cease communications with Mandel. ZZZ45 would deny that they were Gemini. Mandel also brings up a 1-star review from Astian Schultz on the Amazon page for the book. It was a fairly scathing review, titled The Untruthful Story of Resident Evil 1.5, as told through the grudge of an entitled man? As it turns out, this review was not Gemini, as this name is attached to Carnivol's accounts. So it was actually him who wrote this. I actually saw this review before I ordered the book and thought, wow, okay, My mindset going into it was already one where I knew I'd have to remember that the story was being told from someone's perspective, even if they did gather information from various other people. But I was more alert about that from this comment. And I've got to say, after reading through it all and taking meticulous notes, I honestly don't think the bias inside of it was as bad as this comment made it out to seem. Although there was bias with Mandel throwing in his opinions here and there, I was aware of that. And I was able to make the distinction between the objective information and clear opinions. Mandel would also even encourage those critical of his research to write their own version of the events from their perspective, even if they had an unfavorable view of him. Unfortunately, Mandel would also get dealt a bad hand and would have to deal with another type of battle. At the time of that article's publishing, March of 2019, Mandel had been going through cancer treatment and had even undergone surgery for it. That hasn't stopped him from publishing multiple other books, including a free fan novel that was even complimented by Capcom. Thankfully, as of 2023, it seems like his cancer had gone into remission and that he's generally been doing better since. I must admit here that a part of me wanted to reach out to many of the people involved in this whole story to get their opinions on everything more than a decade after the last leak. But I saw something in the Eurogamer comments that snuffed that idea out. A comment from DXP. I think with this finally released, I could finally close the book on this entire event in my life and move on. And trust me, I've wanted to do that for years. Mandel, in his comment, would also say something similar. Like Alzair, I've officially left RE 1.5 behind and moved on. I did not want to impede on whatever piece they have found outside of this saga. I didn't want to disrupt anyone, just to dig up the past for this. I'd rather just tell this story as best as I could. They all stopped for a reason. This hunt, for the amount of time it spanned, must have taken so much out of them. But all of that, no matter what side they and the rest of the community were on, came from a place of passion. I can't imagine how delighted they were when they found out that in the Resident Evil 2 remake, there was a skin that paid homage to 1.5 in the form of Elsa Walker's biker suit. At the end of the day, they were Resident Evil fans, through and through, just like me and so many others out there. Likely, that includes you. We love this franchise and would do so much for it. I made this 3-hour Resident Evil Iceberg video that took me months of back-to-back work. I've also done challenge playthroughs, such as beating the Resident Evil 4 remake using only eggs. That passion is what led to me making this very video. And regarding the ugly side of people's actions in the story, I would argue that those are still in the name of passion. In the Eurogamer article comments, when ZZZ45 tried to discredit Mandel, they posted a link to a 2018 Assembler forum where the community was discussing Mandel's book. Here, a user known as Oopalupa posted a link to an online version of Mandel's writings. The book is filled with biased ramblings and guesswork. It's best to take it with a pinch of salt. And in the following month, they would deactivate the link and offer a formal apology to Mandel. And not just for copyright infringement. I wish I could also change my original post with the link and unnecessary insult. I apologize for being harsh with your work. That was uncalled for, and I should have thought twice before writing that. I had read so much controversy about the 1.5 leak and about various people involved that I took you for another one of the evil conspiracy theorists without even reading most of the book. I'll be more thoughtful with the things I write about other people and their work from now on. Sometimes in our lives, we are having bad days and are making stupid decisions. I can't undo what I did, but I sincerely hope that you'll accept my apology. Everyone involved in this story were people with their own motives, hopes, and dreams. And as people, we mess up. I don't blame them for most of those distasteful actions they may have taken in the past. It was obviously a very heated, tension-filled time with seemingly high stakes. I also don't blame them for not wanting their past actions put under a spotlight. that could be why they were so upset with this book. And that's why they might even become upset with this video. Even if that were to happen, I don't blame them. They were caught up in something that was big and important to them. They, in the pursuit of their passion and drive for legacy, just got too deep in it. For many of us, we have had our own 1.5s to an extent, something we have obsessively chased after. This hunt encapsulates every angle of that desire, both the good and the bad of it. And whether we get what we want or not, we're all forced to figure out what's really important for us. This hunt had spanned over a decade. As such, there are obviously lots of things I had to leave out, so if you're really interested, I once again would encourage you to check out the article and this book, and maybe even the archive forums. But what do you think? Leave your thoughts down below, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.